it's hard to say anything about it. Constructively, there is very little. I honestly think if you played Ravenloft, Kragus, right? This is Ravenloft. Like, what I mean is the structure of progression and stuff is still Ravenloft. And they still do the weekly hauls, only it's extended even further. Weekly hauls don't go up. Step progression is even more redundant, like and even more so than ever before, content is locked behind a player gate. And what I mean by player gate is that you have a game that requires an increasing tax on around the clock player base, but the designs continuously almost impress me to the level of how it excludes player growth at all. Like, it's tough. Like, oof. The dungeon designs are competent. I mean, it's still up to the standards that they've set a long time ago. But the standards doesn't allow player growth, and it constantly creates bigger and bigger gaps between how to get to, quote unquote, what most people call the end game, and how people start. And it keeps getting bigger. Like the gap keeps getting bigger. So the bigger that gap gets, the less welcoming it becomes, and the more detached all the individuals who claim to be end gamers are. Like, there just isn't an incentive progression level that encourages a mixing of the player base. So you just have people that hop in for a month and never come back to the game, which is the vast majority of players, and then you have the people who are playing the game regardless of what you release. It's to the point that the player base that are already doing that will just stay out of complacency. It's not out of merit, it's just out of sentimentalism. So what that does is it lowers the quality or the need or the pressure to innovate at all. And then from the perspective of a new player, it's predatorial. So you have this mixed feeling of people who don't ever grow psychologically at all, get reaffirmed about their status in the game over and over again. And then you have all the prey, whoever gets ensnared and then gets just immediately just gets poor feedback. After a month, the game is practically dead to them. So you're constantly over time generating poorer and poorer reception of the game. Meanwhile, the gatekeepers continue to get reaffirmed over and over again about their false impression of their superiority or competence. It's one of those things that it's a scary environment where if you're always at the top and you have always been at the top, you haven't learned anything. You don't need to learn anything. You're always at the top. The game is made for you. And with that comes this like attitude that comes with it. We're like, oh yeah, you know, we know how to do this. It's like, well, you didn't learn anything. You're always ahead. You were never behind to even learn anything to get ahead. It's to the point I would probably, for those individuals who are so used to it, try starting a game over. What I mean is try starting a new game, and those people would probably be content with just staying. Oh, can I not use the same? Oh, I can't use the same position for this. Those people will be content with just being reinforced that they don't really need to change the way their approach is. They're just churning away over and over again. And I don't mind that. I really don't. But I'm happy to say I at least enjoy other things that doesn't make me an incredibly cynical and high standard person. Like the tolerance level in this game is just non-existent. And the people who are tolerable don't stay around for more than a month. Because they would play the game and then they would just leave. You know, your glowing sunshine of rainbows, enthusiastic. They pop in. Eventually they'll get to a point where it becomes non-negotiable to not talk to individuals who's ahead of in the game. And when you get that question, immediately there's that incredible cynicism about you gotta put in effort, this is my appearance of effort, and just so we're gonna get the psychology out. When you're ahead and you keep staying ahead, that's the lowest point of effort moving forward. Until you are stripped and start from nothing, you cannot appreciate the distance that people have to climb. It happens all the time. Like, it's to the point I don't have like any form of chat open at all in the game anymore. It's so weird. And I'm perfectly content because I like doing this. It's very therapeutic, which is probably the same way the other people do. The ones that I'm referring to enjoy it too. Only it's their whole thing. Yeah. It's tough. I don't know from a design standpoint and a psychological standpoint what the leadership and the publication has in mind for this, but it's gonna be tough to convert this into a community forward game. A live service game is pretty dead in the water without a community forward initiative. Personally, I have no idea. Like, it's tough. I've been thinking about it. And I was thinking about something constructive to say about it, but there's just so little to say to change. What works already does work the way it is, but it's uninspired. There's no intent, or at least it doesn't seem to me there's an intent on wanting to improve or maybe take risks, and maybe it'll be worse, but there's no initiative to change. So there's really nothing there isn't anything interesting I can say about something that doesn't change over time. What I can say is it's the same experience, for better or for worse, and one thing I forgot to take the contraband from there. One thing I can say is that it is an unattractive model for the majority of gamers that are looking for an MMORPG in this day and age. And it's only unattractive because it's not new. Like, it's not trendy. But one thing could be said is its attraction to old school stuff. Like, eventually it still has a steady flow of old school stuff. So like, maybe if they hang on long enough, if you take like the hands-off approach, if you do this long enough, there'll become a time when the trend cycles back to something traditional like this. Like, it's to the point where the design is so traditional that you could consider this as a stopover for classic game design. Like, this has become a historical piece to me. So no, you can't find an experience like Neverwinter anymore. For better or for worse, it is a unique experience if you play Neverwinter. Is it an experience that will compete or be sustainable? The answer is kind of yes. It can be sustainable if the publisher who owns this, which is Gearbox Publisher and like the bigger Gearbox publishing group, along with like its parental company. The answer is yes, because it makes it can make you can always do the thing about shrinking down, right? Shrinking down, meeting the demands, and then constantly mitigating costs and rearranging your staff until the expenses are less than what the game is pulling in. You can definitely do that. You can downsize and all that jazz for sure. Is it great for the DN? Is it great for their legacy? Not particularly. You're not building any legacy. Every single day, there's gonna be more and more poor sentiments with the game. So like, if you ever raise like the name Cryptic, right? It is synonymous with a legacy that isn't a very positive thing. So you can't sell something by saying a Cryptic is gonna make a new game. Cryptic what? Like the modern gamer will look at Cryptic say, I've never heard of these guys. And then they'll go do some digging. It's like, wow, they killed so many, they quote unquote killed so many games, but it's not really that case. It's just they make they're like the workhorse. I would say one thing that's fantastic, that's admirable about them is, as a group, they're a workhorse. They stick to their guns, right? It's just unlucky that this type of game design, it's not appealing. It's just the vast majority of people do not find this stuff appealing anymore. So instead of going back and forth, you know, going through a period of change and then coming back to it, right? Or maybe doing a integration, it just feels like they're gambling on, if we keep doing this long enough, the trend will come back to us. And I don't have to tell you this, but if there's any place that has a chance to take a risk with the D&D property right now, is right now. This very moment. Like, it is such a golden goose right now to just take risks. Because the power of D&D, the power of having Wizard of the Coast it's a grand time to take some financial risks. But I don't know how the leadership works and how Cryptic works in the ownership now, because they recently had a change of ownership. It was like within the last 2 years. It's tough. I play this out of legacy. I mean, ironically, there's no really better word to describe it. I play this out of legacy because I could earnestly say there is something that you can tap here in terms of traditional design. Statistically, though, it's myopic. Like, it's like that guy in a local shop making paint the way they want to make since ever, because it's endearing that they're sticking to making the paint the same way all the time. And maybe one day, lucky, a TikToker or someone comes by and shows, wow, their 80-year history of making this product the same exact way. That takes a lot of dedication, right? That's kind of it. So maybe one day, if they're really lucky and they continue to stick to their guns, they can be very trendy for a like vintage kind of way, or somehow this comes back into vogue and people enjoy doing the trial and error, no sense of progression, self-proclaimed, self-feeding elitism model that more or less just goes against all forms of inclusion, right? Right now, this is kind of a funny thing. The player base in this game is more heavily European than it is the United States anymore, even though it's US servers and a US company, right? Because this game does not reflect the US model. US models, in terms of gaming, is about inclusion and accessibility. This is legitimately, I don't want to generalize too much, but the dominant philosophy when it comes to a European design tends to be exclusivity, like elitism in a practical way. So you have to reach a certain level of excellence to be considered acceptable. Very homogenous type of opinion. Like if you're good, then you get to be good. So every good person hangs out with every good person. So it becomes an exclusive club. It's very European, in my opinion. Like what I mean is in terms of European gaming design, like competitive shooters, right? That's probably arguably the hottest genre in among exclusively in that region, like EU West and EU East. It fits very well with that, and sure enough, that's what's taken over in this game. So around this time, this moment, actually it's already too late. 6 hours earlier would be the prime time in Neverwinter. This is where most of Europe is in their like evenings, coming back from work and stuff, is the most active time. When you go into US evenings is non-existent. And that's one of the things to draw conclusions for myself, is that it doesn't reflect the culture in the United States. The United States has gone through a period of inclusion, right? It's starting on the internet, in video game, is about accessibility. The more accessible your game is, the more attractive it is to the American audience. And that could be making a game easier. That could be lowering the threshold of design. That could be streamlining the thing. The idea is getting options, having customizable options. It incredibly increases, in my opinion, American fan base when it comes to these types of games. The more options and flexibilities they have, the more attractive it becomes. And a game that was initially very unattractive, I still play, Phantasy Star Online 2, NGS. Sega recognizes it's about, the PSO2 team recognizes it's about flexibility and feedback. So what they focused on was just keep bringing more options. Hey, someone wants to do traversal, put in traversal. Someone wants a hardcore version of all the bosses, put in a mode that allows them to tweak the bosses any way they like. They want leaderboards, they want achievements. So it keeps accommodating as many form of gamers as possible onto one platform. And they stabilize their like global servers. And just now that it's stabilized, it only has growth in its potential. It's difficult to misstep when you have all the options open. In this game, it's one option, or it's their way or the highway. It's like one directional. It's a very pure design, but it's just not appealing right now to Americans. I have to say, in general, 9 out of 10 Americans would find this very unattractive. Where basically, if you're not the gamer, the type of gamer this game is directed towards, there's no chance you can be retained. You will leave within the month. And the month period is a honeymoon period that even those 1 out of 10, that 10%, by the time they reach there, 90% of them will leave because of the animosity of the privileged. It's kind of like a, yeah, you finally made it to the I don't know, to the golf club, right? You join it, you punch your ticket, got your membership into the golf, like your country club, and then you realize that's not part of your identity, and you just eat it out of there. That's usually what happens to 90% of the remaining 10%. I've been in the club for a really long time now, so it's more of a legacy complacency. Like, I just check out what they're doing. Hey guys, what are you doing in the exclusive club? And then I don't participate in it because it's uninteresting. It doesn't change, but it is good to know, so I stay in it to see what's going on, because once you're out of it, you can't, it's very difficult to get back in it. Like, you finally became a millionaire and you try to join the millionaire club, right? And it can be growing pains at first, even that. And usually speaking, your roots will make you different. And this is truly that type of game. And to me, if they are perfectly happy with that, can't touch that. I think actually the country club of players in this game is perfectly content with having content made for them, and that's fine. It doesn't change what I'm saying about limiting the creativity of the developers, the publishers, and also scaring away any form of growth or retention of new players. When you come in and everyone's friends except you, get out. Unless you really want to suck up really hard and, you know, join. And that's kind of the whole that guilty feeling of selling out and being a sycophant and losing your identity in the process. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows even going through that. I kind of do it out of just understanding the process. I've done it once recently, but I haven't gone back to do it. You know, I do like to do things that I haven't done in a while. Like try to suck up and compete and do these like emotional tests of loyalty and trust in order to get into a privileged club so you can have access to people who have all the resources. It's rough. I don't, it's not easy. And personally, I wouldn't wish that upon most people. To play a game, you have to qualify to play a game? That's unfortunate. I mean, it becomes like a second life. So this game, if I can describe it, it's like an office space. If you want to truly experience this game, enjoy this game, you have to make the right friends. And those right friends expect you to... It's kind of like a fraternity, or maybe a co-ed honor society, like an honor society kind of thing. So you could bend over backwards to prove your worth. And when you get in, 90% of those players gonna think, just wasn't worth it, and then leave, and have this feeling of emptiness inside about trying so hard to bend over backwards to get into the elite club. How do you change that type of mentality? Do you want to change that type of mentality? I have no idea. It would be wonderful if they communicated it. Then I would know for sure. So then I can be able to like be certain about my evaluation. Like, this is the intent of the design right now. They're not really looking for new players. They're looking to keep the old ones satisfied and preserve the old ways, you know, the old school ways of elitism and privilege content. At the moment, it seems like they're skirting between two worlds, which is world of we want as many players as we can get, so we're lowering the barrier as much as we can, but we have no way of retaining the player because the retention content is sacrificed to keep the clergymen and the nobility satisfied just enough. So when you do both, you end up with the current state of Neverwinter, in my opinion. The ability to recruit players, right? The ability to get that initial positive impression, or not positive impression, long enough to possibly make them make a few buyer's remorse choices, only to not be able to retain them in like within a month. So I could say that this game is predatorial, or it's getting the sucker, and then the ones that already benefit from it continue to benefit from it. The game continues to run, which fuels more content for the people who are privileged, and they're satisfied. And they continue to get reinforced of this like false superiority that is called privilege. It's one of those things like we were talking about in when we were playing some of the sub stories in Yakuza, like how Akiyama was talking about like skipping lessons, everything is just handed to you kind of thing. That's kind of it. Like, if you did it once and you stay on top and you continue to stay on top, the distance between the next top and the current top is very, very low. Meanwhile, you're trying to make a game that tries to bridge the top with the bottom, starting at the bottom, but there's no bridge there. It's just a cliff. So you go in, nice, and then the bridge just breaks down. It just disappears, and then the top is up there. So somehow you have to like use your superpower and leap across that bridge, and it keeps getting wider. It just keeps getting wider and wider with each module. When they try to reset, so there are some resetting times. They did it about 2 times now. The reset, when the bridge dropped, when the top dropped down, it was met with a lot of nobility. The nobility friction is when they changed the combat system. Like they overhauled how stats and certain fundamentals change, and that was met with a lot of resistance from the nobility. But it made the casuals, it genuinely, those periods were the highest growth periods in recent module history. when the combat changed, because it kind of swapped it up. So it makes people feel like everyone was working and working together to figure out the stuff, right? That doesn't happen basically at all anymore. At least in these last 2 updates. Maybe it'll happen in the next one. Maybe there's a complete overhaul of how DPS works or something. That would probably reinvigorate a lot of returning, like, people, like players that have left as well, because they would be genuinely just interested in how it differs. But if you're really into like doing something because you can, which is what I'm doing here, it's basically doing what I can. It is a different type of experience. Yeah, they've done it twice. The one time was mechanical, so all the encounters at wills encounter powers, and that was module 16. Then they redid the entire companion system, the entire mount companion system, and how stats work. That was 2 modules after the combat module, the change in the combat module. Those were the 2 times. And it created chaos. But in all of that chaos, it was a growth period, momentarily. Until then, it stagnated again, and the power, the pecking order was reestablished again. And the people who were in power were still in power. Some of the people left. So there was a kind of a slight power struggle here and there for influence. Ironically, it sounds very like fantasy games, you know? It sounds like a proverbial Game of Thrones. And, you know, we talked about the psychology behind attracting things to the characteristic of the things you're making. I mean, you could make a very compelling essay on how the appeal of Western fantasy attracts Western cultures that compete in a very Western way. So this is no Japanese designed philosophy game, obviously, or a Eastern design game. But even Eastern design games, it's kind of ironic because Eastern design games tend to favor iteration, like constant refinement, to elegance, right? To like buffer a rough diamond in the rough until it shines like a priceless diamond. But in this way, they still at least continue to refine their process. This is complacency. The type of design that this group has done, whether it be a leadership position or not, I'm gonna say it with 2 positive things, a negative and a positive thing, just to make it sound a little bit neutral. It's lazy, but it's also safe. Like, I'm not saying lazy as in it's low effort. It's lazy because it's safe. There's no risk involved. It's definitely less effort they can place without, but it's very safe. So games like if you're gonna make a sequel, there's appropriateness for this design. When you're making a sequel, often being more complacent and taking less risk, hence using less effort, but also understanding what a sequel is, it's a safe approach. It's a very pragmatic approach. It's cost effective, it's fast, you can make a lot of it, but it's efficient. But in terms of creativity, it's lazy. And that's kind of where they are. That's the feel you get anyways. There's legitimately no clear sign of attempt. Like, this is almost a slight, it's kind of like a, what do you call it? It's a smoke screen. So you move things around a little, you move how these are displayed, but in the end of the day, it's a repackaging. Constant repackaging of the same philosophy. For better or for worse. I don't mind going through it and seeing if they ever change. I'm kind of in it to just see where it goes. I'm not a very sentimental person when it comes to video game legacy, so although I do have to admit my current thing with Yakuza might make me a different person by the end, but this does not. And there's nothing that compares now to the amount of time in this game. My legacy, the longest legacy I have is in Neverwinter. Not even, there's no competition anymore. It used to be Atlantica Online, but now it's Neverwinter. ESO. No, I'm getting sentimental about it though. What I mean is, it's creating sentimentalism with the characters given. But once the story ends, it ends. Like it's not like I want it to not end, so to speak. That would be getting attached. So I don't really have any fear that the end is coming. But I have feelings for it. What I mean is, the game is capable of making me feel things, which is great. Usually, like, what I'm doing here makes me feel like 0. Like, there's really... In fact, it makes me feel the same way, which is... I don't feel anything now, but if I had to guess, it makes me feel the same way I felt 10,000 hours ago. And if that's a great thing, if the experience was the same sensitivity every time. But I've been doing it for like close to 10,000 hours, right? So the experience is no longer novel. So it probably would literally feel the same, but I haven't taken a break from it or anything. Like, I played continuously that long. So over time, you become numb to it. It no longer feels like you're doing anything. How do I make value out of this? Well, I don't feel like I'm wasting my time because I'm analyzing it. So I'm talking about it here right now and doing this stuff because it makes it more, it incentivizes me to be more reflective about it, more critical about it. I'm doing it as a legacy. I wanna witness the end of this game, or the resurgence of this game. So you know that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that phrase, but you know how like some cynical would say, I just want to watch the world burn. I just want to see what happens, because life is worth seeing what happens. So this game is arguably one of the oldest games with one of the least growing retention rates. and I want to see what happens to it, and I want to be part of it, right? Whether it's they're finally announcing that they're closing the game down, right? And then I would be there for the last day or something, or they usher in a new golden age because of a new leadership or something. I kind of just want to see where it goes, because it's legacy now. It's kind of like asking yourself, you lived your life for 40 years and then you decided, I don't want to see how it ends. Some people can find that like that's what they want. They don't want to see the end. But me, I'm along for the ride. And that's genuinely curious. There isn't going to be another game that replaces that. Like, there's nothing else that comes close anymore. I didn't see the end of Atlantica Online. I saw it at a distance. Like, it's still technically alive, but I left in the middle of it. I didn't see how it all ended. Ironically, the game that I played the least, but I really liked, I saw the end of it. Like Terra Online, I saw that server close. And what is the other game I played a really long time? It's World of Warcraft. It's still around, so... And I've missed so much of World of Warcraft. I wouldn't even consider it a legacy for me. This game is one of my legacies. And it's just would be really interesting to see how it'll either end or continue. My doubts are this game, I will outlive this game, is my thought. And I want to see it to the end. Is that why you go back to... psychologically, it would probably be a yes. Like, something about Eve is a part of you, and you just have developed that sentimentalism, right? You just want to visit every once in a while, right? So, like, I thought about it. I thought about taking a break from Neverwinter and then coming back and seeing how it feels again. The whole thing about desensitizing yourself and then revisiting the stuff. But that's what the joke is. Like, a game with legacy has that meme. Like, the players in this game literally meme each other publicly, saying, alright, it's like, I hate this game, I want to uninstall. And then the first meme is, see you in 3 months. That's playing on psychology. And I think that is one of the strengths of what Cryptic is doing. And I don't know what their executives want. Like, do they want to make more money? Do they want to expand? Or are they just fine with legacy, right? Because those players will eventually come back and revisit. It's the longer and how often that repeats. Nostalgia is powerful. It's a really powerful drug. And desensitizing and detoxing, or detoxing in quotes, it's a very powerful thing. And I haven't taken a break from this game. So, I've become steady state with this game. And I don't think there's any other game that have... My current one is PSO2, but it's only been, what? 1/7 the time. I think PSO2 is crossing 1,200 hours. And those are the only two games. It's hard to keep up with live service games. Yeah, I do it 3 times over. I have 3 tunes that I primarily use. And I do everything 3 times over just to see, for bootstrapping purposes. So like, I do it with my first tune, see what it's like. Then I do it my second tune with a little bit of refinement. I do it on a 3rd time with a 3rd guy. And there are 3 different classes for my evaluation purposes. I actually play all the tunes. I mean, like all the classes and stuff at some point, but I usually just do it 3 times just to get a personal sample size, you know. One would say safely, Kragus, that is probably why you go back to Eve. And it's not a bad or a good thing. Like, no one, it's, I don't know why people insist on trying to categorize the going back to something or in association with like weak discipline and all that stuff. It can be very cathartic. Yeah, and like Hoffers, he does that, and he literally lives that. Fortnite, Call of Duty, Tarkov, Genshin Impact. It describes the modern gamer. And if you want a game that works with that, sticking to your guns is very effective. So like I think that's what Cryptic's strength is with this, the type of design. If you stick to your design, the people that liked it has a high chance of resonating with it, returning to it. It doesn't feel foreign anymore. However, like as a good example, right? The worst reception when a player comes back, and you hear it all the time, when a veteran player comes back, the first remark is dealing with the 3 2.5 overhauls. They either left before the combat rework, which is less so now because it's been like 3 years. The second one is how all the stats work. So that would be the second gripe point. And then the third, it was most recent. All the enchantments were redone. The enchantment system was completely dumped for something new. So those people who came back expecting to get a little swig of the same thing, it's no longer the same thing. So the very first comment and complaint is all the changes. So in a way, if Cryptic lean hard and they say they make enough money, just keep making the same thing, right? If they keep making the same thing, even if someone hated, right? Even like you, Kragus, if you hated the old enchantment system, when you come back to the game, it will feel like you hate the old enchantment system. It will be like a revisiting of memories, right? For example, like if someone revisited a memory of a wartime, when you revisit it, it still is going to be a wartime feeling. It's going to suck, but you're revisiting, so it'll feel like at home. So if they go that way and they make enough money, they can keep this game alive indefinitely. Put people cycling back and looking for that same hit. Like, that works for me, right? I have a favorite restaurant. I don't go to that favorite restaurant every single day. I go to it every once in a while. It's a joy. Every time I go to that favorite restaurant, every 3 or 4 months, it's a celebratory dosing. It's not micro dosing. Now, micro dosing is the current live service games, like everything with the Hoyo verse, PSO2, NGS, like all the Japanese live service games and the Korean live service games. That's microdosing, which happens like on a bi-weekly basis. You're coming back for a hit like 3 times a week, and every 2 weeks there's a spike of a larger dose, and then every other 2 weeks, every other 2 weeks, and then every 3 months it's a gigantic spike. So microdosing produces a habit more reliably. Revisiting things like EVE Online, which stays consistent because it's a mirror of the time, like the player creation, right? It's one of the most consistent systems. It's more of a once every 4 months thing, and that's kind of their development cycle. Yeah, in Destiny and all the games that use expansion type roadmaps, it's celebratory. Like, yeah, there's something I look forward to. It's been 4 or 5 months. I've been detoxing away from it, and it hits different just for that moment, and then you're gone. You're gone again. If that's sustainable, it's sustainable for millions of players. Destiny is a great example of it. So, but which way are they going? It's hard to tell. It's so hard to tell for Cryptic because they're doing 2 different things. And those 2 different things attract 2 different types of players that really dislike each other. Like, what I mean is they're non-compatible groups. So they're half doing something that isn't, and it's still uninspired in my opinion. They're half doing something that is a twist on what they already did, and then they're continuing to do the same thing that keeps the ones that are already playing. But those 2 groups create an animosity with each other because they're just inherently incompatible. So all the new players are gonna be inclusive players. Like, hey, we should help each other out. Like, how come this game doesn't help us players like reach where you guys are and stuff? And then the other half of the mechanics is like, we reached here with hard work and we were dedicated and loyal to this game for over 10,000 hours. Get on our level before you can come into the club. Like, we're not gonna punch your stamp and your get to the free country club after like 40 hours. Like, who you think you are, right? Because that's the old model. To get high and privilege in an old MMORPG model is thousands and thousands of hours and loyalty and dedication. The moment their gear expires after spending hundreds of hours is the moment they start lashing out and getting the pitchforks. The casual player, the inclusive player, it changes every 2 weeks. Whatever you just did 2 weeks ago is out of date, just gone. So you're attracting 2 different types of player populations, and they really dislike each other. They're so incompatible. Like, the new casual players that they have the model for, they expect that gears change every 2 weeks or every month at the longest. PSO2 turn over gear every 2 weeks. Like, so far it's been the longest period has been like a month and a half. And it's actually kind of weird. To the point where it's going on a month and a half now in PSO2, and I'm concerned. That's how regular it is in PSO2. So the moment they stop doing that, players are concerned that the team is struggling with creating new things. So those are 2 different player populations that won't get along together. It is really fundamentally and psychologically, they will be at odds with each other. And every time a new module drops so far in this game, it attracts both types of players. And they don't play nice with each other. So I don't know where they're going with it. You sit here, every new module drops. Some people say, hey, I'm coming back. It's like, what is new and stuff? It's like, well, you should have been here. That's basically paraphrasing. They don't really... I don't think it sounds that nice. It's much meaner than that. It's to the point where... This is the even crazier part, in my opinion. It's to the point where the player base that's already here, the loyal player base, they're self-sabotaging their game by making it appear like it's not worth their time. So when there's a new player that seems like they would invest, what they would do is continuously give the impression to the new player that it is a waste of time. Like, hey, yeah, you know, I'm a gatekeeper. Cynicism's like, oh, you're gonna do that? In another 2 months, in another 2 weeks, by the time they're just gonna throw it out the window. Why even bother play this game? Meanwhile, they're playing the game and benefiting from the game design and whatnot. But the cynicism is so real that they're trying to keep their club exclusive. Are they aware of it? I'm not sure. I personally, if you spend all your time in privilege over and over again, your awareness just drops off the face of the planet. I worked in science for so long, I dropped off the face of the planet of trying to understand how little I understand. I'm not gonna say they are, because it's been more than it's been more than 10 years, but at a time I would believe the vast majority of them understand what they're doing. They're playing down their stuff to remain in a position of power, right? The stuff like, hey guys, just whatever, just buy this stuff. That'll be fine, you know? Just buy this stuff. And meanwhile, they're the ones profiteering off of it, right? Like, here's the good stuff, but no, that's not the good stuff. I only keep the good stuff for myself, kind of deal. That's kind of how it feels. Here I actually played MMO stuff, and here I'm not understanding genre. Last time I tried to play MMO, it was Guild Wars 2. I don't know if you know. I know, yeah. Actually, I think Fictitious still plays Guild Wars 2. Yeah, lots of marks. Yeah, MMO. Yeah, you kind of highlighted some of the more memeable and generalizable aspects of MMOs. Yeah. Guild Wars 2 is 8 Eastern MMO, so even more so in Eastern MMOs. Actually, the whole like going to point A to point B and everything marked is actually most refined in Eastern MMOs. The Eastern inspired MMOs. I don't want to say Korean MMOs specifically, but it is really inherently in overblast. It's like incredibly to the next level in Korean MMOs. The current one being like BDSO, not BDSO, BDO, Black Desert Online. That'll get you following marks. This game, not so much, because the areas are quite small. So what you really end up with is big bubbles. Like big bubbles, occasional markers like this. You just see like big bubbles. Go around here, just look around here. Zonal areas. I don't know. I don't have any strong feelings either way. This is not something I do to elicit any feelings. Yeah. The BDO did not launch twice. Maybe you might be thinking about Blessed. Blessed launched twice. It was originally called Blessed, and it did really sus, and then it relaunched as Blessed Unleashed. I mean, if you think about it, Final Fantasy 14 relaunched too. Oh, you launched it twice. Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, it's kind of coincidence, but there are MMOs that launch more than twice, and they turned around as well. So like literally launched more than twice. The fighter gamer, kind of. Yeah, I can see that. I definitely can see that. But they don't really need to anymore because Capcom has filled that void fast. In different regions, if they are region locked or something like that. Most games are not region locked. But the larger games are region server specific though. So you could kind of see it as a lock. So like it's difficult to usually it's monetized as well. Like they're server region server specific on bigger games. I'm not sure if it's true for BDO. A classic one would be like World of Warcraft. Even World of Warcraft's BattleNet, like the Blizzard's proprietary BattleNet, is region locked. And by region locked, I mean your account is region bound. So the progress from one region does not carry in between the other regions unless you pay for it. You could, oh yeah, also region specific could mean when they get updates too. Because like, for example, lots of Chinese live service games would have a delayed update schedule. Neverwinter is actually one of them as well. And there's also extenuating circumstances. Like Russia's server was different from Neverwinter's server, like the global server as well. And also like for PSO2, I play on the global server. Japan exclusively has their own server. And the two don't necessarily, they try to make it sequential, like at the same time. And also there's console and PC delay schedules too. So a lot of times console, if it's a PC game, consoles have different update schedules, and if it's a console game, PC has a different schedule. So all those still exist. There's an example of them somewhere in some game, in some MMOs. And when I mean MMOs, we're not talking about MMORPGs anymore. We're talking about massive multiplayer online games. And they can come in many forms. Which does include Lost Ark. Lost Ark is not the same as the traditional meaning of an MMORPG. But now we no longer use that phrase very often anymore. We use specifically MMOs because you can't tell. Calling it an MMORPG is difficult to standardize anymore. Like what does that mean? Like for example, Neverwinter is still probably just a combat MMO. And then World of Warcraft would be your like, I don't know what to call it anymore. Yeah. Dungeon MMO? Oh yeah, true. Yeah, Dungeon MMO is pretty good. That's a pretty good distinction. Although that's difficult because combat MMOs have dungeons. So if we're comparing, so there's system type. So you have to classify system type, basically the core mechanic type, right? Combat or tab targeting, right? Combat, or I'll call it cooldown, like non-aiming, right? So there's tab targeting and there's combat. There's real time and a cooldown based. So those are like two different flip sides of the coins. And then you have dungeons or persistence. Persistence is like exclusively world boss dependent, only world events. But then there's like dungeon exclusively or a combination of both. And then there are raid types or non-raid types. And then there are massive like PvP ones where the whole thing is like Eve, right? Eve would be a great example. It's massive, just player controlled. So there's many examples of massive multiplayer online stuff. But I think the one thing that we can agree on is MMOs have to extend beyond an instant-based session. So like League of Legends is not an MMO, it's an instant-based session. CSGO is an instance-based session. Players are matched up. Whenever it goes on to MMO is when there's a obligatory persistence between all the players and it is not selectively done. Basically, there is a hub that is non-conditionally part of everyone's like gaming experience. That's, to me, that would be the minimum amount to qualify the MMO. You have to occupy the same hub or a persistent area that involves more than just the people you have to play against or play with or people you know. There's a persistent world that you have to interact with other players. And even in this game, that still happens. That is an instant-based game. It's even more instance-based game than Neverwinter. But Neverwinter still has a hub. It still has Protector's Enclave. Warframe is even less than that. It's closer to a speedrunning game. It's closer to, it is like an MMO as much as Vermintide is an MMO. If you know what I mean. Like Vermintide is, there's like a slight hub, but no one ever used, like, or like Dark Tides that I play with Eric. It's so small, but it is enough to qualify as an MMO, but still it's like the barest essential. What if there's a server browser? Wouldn't that be like a hub? What do you mean by server browser? And other players, so it almost, you're not forced to interact with any of those players. You're selectively. No. I don't think he means like a literal web browser, because like in RuneScape you actually do have to persistently interact with other people. Yeah, he's talking about like matchmaking server browsers. Like if you all logged into like Battle.net or something and there's a central hub to do matchmaking, that is matchmaking. Like the center hubs, it's like playing Left 4 Dead. When you log into Left 4 Dead, there's probably a central hub where everyone lists the games, the lobbies, and then there's a central chat where you may organize games. That's still matchmaking. That's part of matchmaking. There is no matchmaking obligations in MMOs. You don't get to choose who occupies your space. The game allows the space. So like when you hop in and someone do be playing something or doing something that's part of the game and they're there, you can't just say, get out of my room. That's an MMO, at least in my opinion. That is the fine line that easily most people can agree feels like an MMO. When someone comes in, steals your loot, or pulls something into you, that's an MMO. There isn't going to be someone that's going to drop in your CSGO game all of a sudden that's not part of the game originally that was prescribed. in terms of RuneScape is a persistent world. So it's just some guy can come over and kill your mobs. That qualifies. Like, it's this thing where, like, I'm doing a quest, right? Or I'm doing something. I'm doing a task. And if you ever, someone comes by and does it and delays you, it's like, who invited you? You're in an MMO. It requires a persistent environment that is beyond matchmaking. If it's not beyond matchmaking, then you only encounter those people. And that is not massive. It's a multiplayer. It's a multiplayer game. Absolutely. But you know, you can spend your whole time just playing with friends. In an MMO, yeah, sure, you can form a party with your friends, but there are going to be other players that you don't know around, regardless if you like it or not. Well, PSO2, you just stand there. Like, that's a quality of life that is standard to most live service games now, to give you the feel of collaborative thing. But there's a con to that. Parasiting is a toxic counter to that. The idea of parasiting, where like you're leeching. That's the other side of the flip of the coin. But it is a gold standard. The gold standard of giving up that type of single credit kill thing. You get the other thing, but it's so less toxic than creating a system that determines who contributed the most, which is this game. This type of model is what creates privilege, because it's deviated based on who contributes most. But if you're in a privileged advantage position, you will disproportionately be contributing most. It doesn't matter if it's harder or easier for you, or how harder you have to try than you usually are, you're contributing the most. So you are undisputably in a position of power. In PSO2, if you stand near a mob, you get credit, as long as your character qualifies and have the capacity to attack that mob in the first place. Like, you could be playing Genshin Impact with your character standing nearby. That's how low the threshold is. But even then, that toxicity about like leeching and stuff, idle gaming, is still less than this type, where it's merit based, and merit based pushes player aptitude, absolutely, eventually. But when it becomes stagnated, it no longer pushes player aptitude. I actually thought that core element of MMO is having a character that progresses continuously over time and aren't tied to specific matches. I don't know if you heard of the game Warface. Yeah, Warface. But that is not. Nope. Everyone call it MMO FPS. There could be an environment that has interaction. I pretty sure it might have it, but I wouldn't call it MMO unless it's unobligated interaction with players. MMOs have matchmaking, Worm. It's not the other way. Like, matchmaking is not required for MMO. Like, it's not... An MMO can have matchmaking. Matchmaking is not sufficient to make it an MMO. But MMOs can have matchmaking. MMOs have PvP. They have to matchmake. They have dungeons. They have to matchmake the players. But it has to require an environment that doesn't have matchmaking. Like, it requires an environment where you do not have the choice of who goes in the region. Otherwise, it's considered an instance game, where in this game, it's actually small enough that you can literally populate the entire instance and close everyone off. So if you had a party of 20 orchestrated people, you can go into an instance and artificially block everyone else from playing with you, except for the 20 people you know. It's still closer to a game that only has matchmaking. So it is not sufficient enough to support it being an MMO. So Warface has other things that makes it more MMO-like, which that persistent character thing is a characteristic of MMOs. But it is not unique to MMOs. So if it had that, it's not enough to make it an MMO. The thing I'm describing is the one thing that, if you have that criteria, it's hard to call it anything else. So imagine a game that has that. What would you call it? You would probably call it a massive multiplayer online game. If you had a hub that you had to interact with many other players, you can mute them if you want, but there are going to be hundreds of players you have to mute over time. It's obligatory. Like if you walk to a shopping mall, you have to see other people. You have to see that kid who's excited to buy his 13th copy of Call of Duty. You have to see that crying baby, or that guy trying to silence his baby yelling into his mic into your ear hole halfway across the room. Obviously that's not the case. It's more like people typing like, dude, chill, you're crying like a baby. You have to see that. Like, it's gonna be there. And then you can mute them, but you've already seen it. You've already seen that guy complaining in public lobby. Well, not a public lobby, but the instance. And their avatar is like jumping around and emoting, or like two people in the corner role playing and trying to like get saucy with each other during the avatar, you know, like using their avatar. It's not a choice. It's there. It's a persistent area, and that's what I'm qualifying as. You can have everything else though. MMO is just, you can have everything else. Like, MMO is just that criteria. Then you tack on everything, right? The FPS. That's what Warface is. Warface is an FPS, which includes the matchmaking, a progressive, continuous over time profile of the character that you're playing in a first-person shooter. Call of Duty does that with their prestige system, you know, like perks. Halo Infinite does that. But to get the MMO label, it's just describing just the one thing, and then you add everything else. So what is this game? This is in MMO, third person, combat, RPG. That's all that describes everything else. So it's an RPG because it does the loot system and the loot cycle and all that stuff. It's a combat MMO because things happen in real time. And it's third person because it's third person. Actually, can it be first person? No, it can't. There's no first person on here. So you can't toggle between third person or first person. That's kind of where I'm going at. So over time, I don't know if that definition for myself is going to change, but this is my opinion. It's the one thing that you can't say, oh wait, but that makes it an FPS. Or like the criteria that I picked, right? The criterion that I picked, you can't mistake it for something else, because it doesn't tell you anything else. Like, hey, there's a bunch of people that you have to meet and they all occupy the same space. What's another word for that? Can you mistake that for something else? The closest thing I can think of is a lobby. A lobby, but have you called a game a lobby game before? Or have you called a game a hub game? No, you use the phrase MMO. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. If you say matchmaking, that describes a lot of things. If you say first person, that describes a lot of things. Yeah, it would have to feel like an IRL public place. And that's kind of what makes it difficult for gamers these days. MMOs aren't MMO, especially MMORPGs, aren't very popular. MMO in general, the format of MMO is not popular. And you can probably know why it's not. Because people don't like interacting with people they don't know. So this format, the MMO format, is dying. It's dying really hard. What is taking place of it? Instance-based multiplayer games. And a great example is a game where, like Diablo, when you enter a world, the world you're occupying belongs to the host, and then 3 players enter that host world, and then you play with your friends because it's your instance. Well, it isn't, because World of Warcraft was the biggest game for a long, so it wasn't inherently niche. It was very trendy at first, but it's no longer. It's a passing fad now. Like, it's a passing trend. But World of Warcraft was on top of the world, without sounding like a pun. But there was a time when that genre was not niche. It was incredibly mainstream, like to such an outrageous extent that even in its fading trend, World of Warcraft is still relevant. It still exists. When people talk about PC gaming, they still talk about World of Warcraft, but not so much anymore. And will it come back? I'm not sure. If I had to take a big digression, yeah. So if I had to take a slight digression, there might be a time when people like each other again. I know what I just said. I know it sounds like cynical, but when maybe the internet will become a more sociable place in the future. Like, what I mean is less focus on getting what we want, but becoming more accepting and conditioned to randomness. And then when we become more conditioned to randomness and discovery, MMOs might come back. It might be fun to go into a game where you're going to interact with people you hate, you love, you don't care about, think they're really terrible players or really good players. You're just constantly getting a mixed bag. But in the current state of the internet, it is selecting for behavior where you want to know who you play with. You want to only play with good players. If you want to goof around, you only want to play with players you goof around. If you know what I mean. So, like, if you're tending to goof around, what do? You play a lobby game. What does Overwatch do, for example? There's a lobby for people who goof around. There's a lobby for people who play competitive also. And even then, with those specific modes, like those segregated modes, some people's like, you're not serious enough, get out of competition. You're not good enough, get out of competition. You're too casual, go back to you're too serious, go back to comp, stop playing casual. It's the internet. The internet's societal segregation is part of the internet right now. People play what they want to play. They play with who they want to play with. They play against who they want to play against. If the game does not provide that, it gets poor marks. Like, for example, Overwatch doesn't... comp is kind of sucky right now. You either get steamrolled or get rolled. Like, you either steamroll or get rolled. It's not great matchmaking. Like, I want to have good games all the time, so you have to, like, matchmake for that. You can't have terrible failures. In an MMO, when you, like, try to get a group together, you don't really know what you're getting unless you're part of a guild. right? Then that guild thing leads to elitism. But guild is not the MMO part. Guild is like a clan in Call of Duty or a clan in Destiny. You know, you're all gonna know each other. You're already pre-selected to qualify for something. But when you pug and ask around in public chat, you have no idea. You're gonna get like the worst player in the world you've ever met, and guess what? They will become your best friends or something. It's difficult to know. So in an MMO, that is the classic feeling back in the day, when everyone was trying to find a new friend. They were using, like, World of Warcraft was a place to meet people halfway across the world. You know, like, make friends with people or make enemies even. It's a place where people met, not knowing what's going on. Nowadays, when you get into a lobby or an instance-based game, you know exactly who you're playing for, what you're playing for, who you're playing with, and that's it. And those players, they're gonna play the game knowing a mindset. So like when you're playing Call of Duty, you're there to click heads. Everyone that has entered the game is largely focused on clicking heads. MMOs were a place where, I don't know if I like this game, but can I make a friend that makes me want to like the game? That kind of thing. That's surprising to me. It's one of the most time and money consuming games I've seen, and you have content locked behind social interactions. Like, yeah, it feels like that now though. It feels like that now. It wasn't that wasn't the case before. But now, like, it's falling behind the times in terms of how the interactions work. It has legacy, which is what's hurting. It has legacy, which is why Neverwinter suffers the same thing. Legacy has taken place over welcoming, so it's no longer welcoming anymore. It has become so overwhelming that it might as well be locked behind everything. That's because social interaction has become a barrier to the game. In this game, you cannot socialize with 90% of players you probably want to interact with. Like, those people have shunned. Like, you can't get into the country club. You have to prove that you get into country club. But the game has such a high barrier. You need the country club to get into the country club. So why bother trying? So modern games remove that now. You're in the country club before you even start the game. When you start a CSGO game, you probably have one of your country club friends, your own personal club of friends, or your own personal desires going into the game. In an MMO, one day someone can call you the worst player. The next day you do exactly the same thing and they can probably think you're the best player they've ever met, because those two people occupy the same space. The extremes occupy. When you imagine if you go on Twitch, right? And it's like a television program. You don't get to choose who you get to watch. The television program cycles through programs and you only get to watch the people that it cycles through. What do? That's MMO. Like, every occasional day you need to do this dungeon, and it's like, well, my one friend is not on and I need 7 people. Where am I gonna find 7 people? Well, let's try to find 7 people who are willing to help. And it could be the worst experience you've ever had. It could be the greatest experience you ever had. It's the randomness of meeting random people. That's taken away. That is Neverwinter's crutch right now. If they want to continue doing it the old traditional way, the MMO is no longer an MMO. This game is not an MMO anymore. Like, it's so much less than it was before. It is everyone who knows anyone doing endgame content. You log in to get only people you trust to play the game. And in fact, they removed the MMO portion by saying, oh, we can't succeed, so you enter looking for group. Only experienced players, please, who've completed this, and let me check your gear so that you are highly likely to have succeeded already. No randomness. It's all pre-selected. That reflects the current, in my opinion, the current trend in games is to take the MMO out of multiplayer games. You want to remove chance. When you queue in for a competitive CSGO player, you hope the players on your team are good players. Not learning players, not random players, not players with a personality, not your next best friend, good players. Whatever that status means. So if you're telling yourself that, you are not playing an MMO anymore. And if you can do that, if the game does that for you, you are not playing an MMO anymore. So for example, CSGO, how does matchmaking work? It matches you with appropriate players. That is no longer an MMO. In MMO, like for example, here's a great example of why PSO2 NGS is still an MMO. You walk around, it has instances, but it accommodates like 30 players. You enter, you queue up, 24 players are required for this drill thing, right? You pop in, 12 players are AFK, 3 players are like neck deep into pay to win gear, right? And then 4 players are just role playing and I'm just shooting random things absentmindedly. That's an MMO. You just don't know what you're gonna get. It's like one person is lagging in the corner, running at the wall. Okay. one player is like teleporting everywhere because their ping is so high you can't even see what the character is doing. That's how I would summarize the MMO experience. It's like going to the mall and seeing just random things, and I love it. I actually miss it. I miss that experience quite a lot. And Neverwinter, when it first launched, like Neverwinter Online when it first launched, and I was playing that was it. Like people got into fights, drama, like real actual drama, and like they worked it out, they became friends, they moved, like it was crazy. It was so active back then. Now it's like log in, it's like, man, why can't I find anyone to do this dungeon that I have 10 minutes to do? It's like, why does everyone suck because I failed today once after trying once? That kind of thing. Like they come in with expectations. It's like, man, this game is dead. I couldn't find one player in 2 minutes. Matchmaking took so long. I'm leaving. This game is gone. This game is gone down the drains. But that's the type of stuff that is modern gaming now. And I don't think it's bad or good. It's just a very different world we live in. Because internet has provided on-demand stuff. Like, it is on demand. That is what we're so accustomed to now. And honestly, I love it too. I love things on demand. Like, hey, here's a great one for myself. This is my personal on demand guilty pleasure that makes me less competent over time. How do I do X, Y, and Z? Or who is the director of RGG in the last 6 months? Because I do that and the internet provides just that one detail for me, I don't learn anything outside that one detail. What? No, it's part of the game design. Oh, and you're probably also referring to yesterday. That's also part of the game design. RGG actually dims the game when you're idle for too long. And this game actually does the same thing. That it dims after the game idles for too long. Like it's not me doing it. It's the game actually does that. Like if I stay here for 10 minutes, it's gonna dim on its own, and it's a pop-up box is gonna say you've been idle for 10 minutes. You're gonna automatically log out in like the next few minutes. It's not a coincidence. It's a common practice. It's a very common practice. But the two games that I played back to back, when you saw it, is a coincidence. It's a coincidence that you witnessed that in two really unrelated games, but it is a very common practice for idle timers, because leeching service bandwidth, like MMOs especially, but for RGG it was probably because Japanese designs, like when you dim it, maybe you were staring at it for too long or you walk away. Dimming stuff preserves, like, you know, maybe eye fatigue and whatnot. It's a very it's funny that you noticed that, and I figured that's what you were referring to, because yesterday I was having a digression with you, and you probably noticed that the Yakuza game dimmed, and then I like moved my mouse to relight it a couple of times when we were talking. And it does do this in most MMOs. They do this because of idle timers. We're trying to like complete this digression about MMOs, right? I think MMOs is here's what MMOs are now. I don't know, I'll let you guys guess. What is the best example of the modern day MMO? And I'm going to tell you, I'm not using it as a way to describe a game. Sort of. MMO has evolved, but it comes with a different word now. The new MMO, for the trendy people, like the modern gamer. What is the closest thing to the MMO experience that you can have? It actually starts with an M, funny enough, because it became a meme on its own. It's a metaverse. The metaverse is the modern day MMO. Like a hub, a persistent hub that showcases a person's life as an avatar that's persistently connecting everyone to it, whether you like it or not. It's a metaverse. And that is a meme now because of Facebook. Oh yeah, and I said yeah. Battle Royale is... The only part that Battle Royale is in MMO is that beginning lobby. That might be the closest thing you can have to it, but it's matchmaking during that period, right? But it's a metaverse. So how many companies have tried this, right? So Facebook tried this and they failed, and they actually are closing down the metaverse, by the way. It was recently announced that Facebook is abandoning the project for metaverse. But there were other attempts too. Roblox is still going strong, so Roblox is a great example, right? It's funny, but Ubisoft is trying to establish the Assassin's Creed metaverse, so they're like consolidating all their games into a hub so that they can introduce it. Capcom is trying that with Street Fighter 6. Their hub, they call it the Battle Hub, but in Street Fighter 6 they're creating custom avatars that mix and match the game's core mechanics into a representative way to reintroduce the arcade space in a virtual space. So the Battle Hub acts as an arcade gathering place where you can match up and play anyone in that arcade space. So it works. VR chat. Yes, VR chat is a great example. Yes, VR chat is a metaverse of itself. You go in, It doesn't matter. Like, someone could just walk around with, I don't know, a very sussy avatar, right? You can't help that. It's a virtual space. There are other virtual spaces. Anywhere there's gatherings, like real-time gatherings with representation and free speech, sort of. So our modern day MMOs now are chats. So Twitch chat, YouTube chat, any form of live chat. Those are the closest things to MMOs that are left. And even then, the pre-selection is really strong, right? So you're pre-selecting yourself to VR chat. You're pre-selecting yourself to a specific Twitch stream. You're so the more you remove pre-selection, the closer it gets to the original MMO space. And the reason why World of Warcraft was the original MMO space, it was because it was the only MMO game that was big enough to attract that feeling. So most people experimented with MMOs with World of Warcraft. But now that we have different MMOs and whatnot, even that splintered. So now, why am I not playing World of Warcraft instead of Neverwinter Online, for example? It's now exclusive clubs. So even bars, for example, if you go to a bar, back in the day, there might have been like 2 bars. You know, like in your local area, there might be 1 or 2 bars. Back in the day, you might have had 1 Starbucks in your area. But now there are 4 Starbuckses, and you might have a favorite Starbucks. It became progressively less MMO, more of a private club. So over time, humans tend to do that. They form cliques. They continue to do what they're used to. But the feedback becomes less and less too. You become less used to talking to strangers, bumping into strangers, dealing with strangers, or chatting up strangers. And I kind of miss that. But that's kind of what you do at work. So a lot of times people would juggle work, but now we do online work. There's such thing as online jobs. So now you only interact with people, also specific people online, right? Even at your job. So you become even less practice with interacting with other people. Back in the day, when World of Warcraft was around, you could actually make a compelling argument that World of Warcraft helps you with leadership skills, charisma, and communication skills, because it was absolutely required to be successful in that game. Nowadays, matchmaking deals with all of that. Algorithm-based selections, ranking systems, MMR, all that stuff is used to make you pseudo matchmake even in an MMO game. So like World of Warcraft is now the game you think of where there's barriers everywhere, because most of that is automated now. So to the point where that's what the internet is creating. You're automated for pre-selection. It's very convenient. Now you get to always match up with people around your skill level, even though you might gripe like, hey, they're not around my skill level, I'm better than them. Back in the day, there was no such thing. You say, hey, you look like a great player, let's fight each other. That's what it used to be like. And that is far more random than everything we've done up to this point to make matchmaking convenient. That is the death of MMO. It's no longer massive multiplayer online because you might have 1 million players, but you're only playing against like 10,000 of them. Osu might seem like a massive multiplayer online, but you only play against people within your skill range. And that isn't even automated. You actually selectively do that as a human being. So that's kind of the thing, right? When you go out in life, when you're driving, you're surrounded by people with different proficiencies of driving. You don't surround yourself with equal skilled drivers. Wherever you're going on the internet, It's all filtered. It's filtered to your preference. So in the future, you no longer have skills to interact with anyone other than people like you. So if you're wondering why sometimes it feels like you just don't care about things anymore, which is what we were talking about on the dissociation stuff the other day, is because everything is so familiar. You're just familiar with everything anymore. Like, oh, why you need to be upset, you need to suppress your anger, you're very familiar with that. So there's no need to care about it. And it can be very detrimental and very unhealthy for certain people. For someone like myself, I think I've had enough life experiences before everything was conveniently fed to me that it's not as bad. But for someone who lives always knowing they get what they want, see what they want, play what they want, it's hard to imagine a world where you can do something you didn't expect you could do. So like, you can't, it's hard for you to think being angry can make you feel better. It's hard to think being exaggerated won't have people cheering you on. Like, if you just vented and just threw something out the window, it's hard for you to imagine that someone wouldn't scold you or lecture you about being too aggressive. Because the world you live in, the perspective that you build and mold, is the things you want to see. And it's hard to imagine if you never see the other things. So when I try to tell someone, hey, when you wake up, it's impressive. You decided to get out of bed to do something with your life. You might not ever bump into anyone who will say that to you if your principles are, I have to make money every single day of my life. That's their principle, right? That's their idea. So when they go online, all the stimulus you ever have in your life, including your immediate family, because your immediate family typically shapes your value system. So you go online and everything is programmed around reinforcing exactly what you know to be true. There's very rarely does YouTube, Twitch, I mean, YouTube kind of tries to do it, but definitely not Twitch, where they reinforce only the things that you do, only the things that you think. So in the future, when I say you can love yourself in failure, you can find yourself really hard to believe that if the only thing you believe in is that being victorious is the end game. And then the internet will know, hey, he only talks about winners and big game players and people with high self-esteem. The internet will provide more of that. Hey, you might be interested in this streamer who is #1 in CSGO. Hey, you like #1 players. You might be interested in this streamer who is OSU #1. It's not going to say, you know what? Maybe you'll be interested in this garbage CSGO player because of his personality or something. It's not going to look for that. It's going to look for the thing that you relate to most. So if you're a winner, if you think you're a winner, you'll get winners. The internet will provide you with winners. And then what happens? What happens to you when you are really good and you're a winner, right? You get every instance of an even bigger winner. So over time, you're just constantly driving yourself to a point until you can no longer match it. So where does your self-esteem go? It goes into the dumpster. You just get garbaged on yourself. You stop realizing that all the people you're being fed are really good players and you are still a really good player. They just happens to be better. You don't get exposed to anything else that you're not looking for. Yeah, YouTube is kind of cool that I get recommended polar opposites. Yes, so YouTube is trying. Like, that's what the whole space is. That's what the court, like, the United States, like, is arguing in court about what the responsibility is for conditioning and normalizing this type of behavior, because it is hurting people. It is especially hurting young people, like young people who have no experience or perspective yet. Like, if you drive a kid to constantly say, only focus on successful people, only follow what successful people do, your cousin is so successful, you should be more like your cousin. And then you go on YouTube and say, how to become successful. Well, the algorithm is going to provide is successful people telling you how to be successful. It's not going to provide to you as like, I'm a failure, this is garbage, because none of those people draw viewership. They don't, like, there's no system that encourages the discoverability of people struggling to be successful and haven't been successful already. So now you have a whole generation of young people who go online and only see success. They don't see anything else. And they only see one part of the person's life. It's not like they're intentionally being like deceiving. The successful people aren't trying to be deceptive. You're seeing them at their success part of their life. You didn't see, and YouTube and still doesn't really do this very well, nor does Twitch and stuff. You didn't see how they got there, because that stuff is not popular. It doesn't release endorphins. It doesn't create dopamine. The ones that get it is you see the after the fact, and it's gonna warp your mind. Like, you warp your mind to the point where people don't see time anymore. And that's what I also mean by when we have discussions about MMO, FPSs, gaming industry, legacy gaming industry, humans, we live on a timeline. So it's definitely really worth reminding yourself that it was not always that way. It became that way somehow. It became a different way somehow, and it has a capacity to change. But the internet would not tell you that. There's no way you would gather that logically or intuitively over the internet, because they tell you, this is it. That's how it's always been. That's all you ever see. And then when you see just that, you're going to start thinking, oh, it's always been like that. So when you talk to an internet dependent person, you're going to say, oh, this is the right way to do it. It's always been that way. Like, it's never been anything else. Yeah, well, duh, that's how everyone does it. Because that's true. To them, everyone only does that because the internet only tells you that what you want to see. So when you say, like, is this a good product? Well, they're going to look for good. They're not going to look for everyone who disagrees with your search tool, right? So yeah, you have to teach, in my opinion, someone to use a tool to gather the largest subset of things. There is a silver lining to this. And it's one thing, it's a controversial topic. And I love it for this possible capacity. Machine learning and AI can be a solution to this. And what I mean by that is, when you type in a search result, you can program machine learning to tell the person, hey, you asked about this. Would you be interested in knowing people who are opposed to what you just said or what you're looking for? And here, let me summarize a few more perspectives for you, and I'll provide you with these search results. As opposed to, here, this is exactly what you wanted, right? I'm looking for the very specific thing. So to me, when everyone's arguing about how to best make money off machine learning, I'm thinking immediately it will be the next frontier to help people discover things on their own, because the machine has become more intelligent in order to treat the task like a human being. So when you ask for, I don't know how to do this, an AI response would be like, well, there are several ways to do this. Here are 6 different things that you might want to consider. Method 2 and 3 are slightly different from each other. 1 and 4 are really different from each other. So I would suggest this order and check them all out, as opposed to a search engine that just gives you the first thing that is most likely the answer you're looking. Clear cut, really fast. It can be difficult at first for everyone who's used to the old search engine where it just straight to the point. But with enough time, people will become used to, again, not having a straight answer. They will become used to figuring out what is the best answer for them, and they will be able to get used again to synthesizing more than one information. So when you ask a human being, like an expert, right? You ask them a question, they'll give you like 4 different answers. And the more expert they are, the more confusing the answer is going to be. A search engine doesn't do that right now. The classic search engine is, this is it. This is right. The top one is right. And you stick with that. What was the Google meme? You know, the Google meme that we do all the time, but people never internalize it, is Google that. That's the top search result. That must be true. That's the meme. Like, no, the top search result is the most popular hit. It's not true or false until it has converging evidence. And only then, that only increases its accuracy. It doesn't actually, it's converging circumstantial evidence. Until you validate that those are objectively validated observations, you can't, and that's a luxury in its own right. So at most, the top search result that you get, it's a converging result, as in many people take it as the popular accepted thing. It's not evidence to say it's true, but machine learning might be able to alleviate that. It'll make people, it'll get you used to thinking again. And what I mean by that is it's not an insulting thing, because personally, I would love it if the world was so, I mean, I don't mind it if the world was so clarified, right? Like, if the world did behave like a search engine where it provides one right, one wrong, there would be a lot of less conflicts, right? There will be agreements, people won't argue because there are facts and not opinions. But the idea right now is the internet is creating fake news, but the fake news is not created by humans, it's created by behavior, like the human condition. So the internet is not gelling well with how humans discern information. It's conditioning humans to behave in a way that hurts the human condition. So search engines are making us think the way we don't typically think. That helps us stay healthy. And that's the talk. I think that summarizes why Google is constantly under attack for YouTube, and how the US government is still constantly arguing with Facebook about like grooming young adults, like, you know, subliminal advertisements. So that is the danger right now. The search result removes humanity's ability to practice being analytical, synthesizing stuff. One great example is ChatGPT is providing people with professional products, and they're wrong. Like, what I mean is, there are, and it goes really, really high up in like the highest level of stuff. Like a lawyer submitted something as a lawsuit, and they asked ChatGPT for a summary so that they use it, right? They use it, and then they asked ChatGPT again that, can I have the citations? And they didn't check the citations, and it was wrong. That's how difficult it is right now to break away from automation. Yeah, people stop practicing double checking. They stop practicing using what their brain does so well, in my opinion. Like, they can do it so well. So whenever someone comes up and say, oh, I'm just stupid, I just Google everything, it's like, well, you're not stupid. First of all, you're just very dependent on something that is obviously really easy to do, and you don't want to do harder things, but you're just not used to it anymore. So like, it's easy to Google because you have done it really much. Ask my mother how to Google something, and she would have no idea what to do. She would rather go all the way around and ask a bunch of strangers. They would go all the way around and ask a couple of strangers just to get an answer that's subpar, instead of typing into Google, because they don't know how to type into Google, or they don't know how to interpret or use Google. So the idea is not really the internet. The internet isn't dumbing. It's making one action so much more efficient than another action. So if you choose to walk your entire life and just keep on walking, it actually hurts more to sit in one place. If you sit in one place for a very long time, it's probably gonna hurt less to sit than walk. So you don't end up, you got a disproportionate balance of like exercising, and your brain works the same way. If you do a task really, really well, you're sacrificing all the durability and plasticity of the things you don't use anymore. So if you stop having to negotiate what is real or what is not real and have the search engine do it, then you become really, really good at doing what the search engine does. But you skipped over. You no longer do the other skill. It's not that you become stupider or dumber. You just stop practicing it. And is there a point of no return? I answered this before. I truly believe our brain outlives our body. So I want to believe that you don't lose the capacity to do something permanently. As in, you don't lose the capacity to be able to find tackling hard questions is very fun. You can still learn that. There's no point of no return where if someone spent 70 years relying on Google, there's no way they can ever like not use Google ever again. I think the brain is plastic enough that you can still continue to change the surface of brain. So like, for example, learning to love something, the capacity to enjoy something that you didn't once enjoy, or etc. That type of thing, I think it's a lifetime skill that humans have. Humans can recondition themselves. I like to believe that. But there are certain skills that are very hard that you might make a compelling argument like, nah, humans can't change out of that. Like, you can't change that after spending like 30 years doing this or 40 years doing this. I try not to believe that, because if so, then there are a whole generation of kids that are grown up on the internet, the old internet, before YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok and stuff have to change, right? And they're gonna be stuck in that old way. I don't believe that for a sec. I think Bing, Microsoft adding Chat GPT 4.0 to Bing is a wake-up call that all the business people are worried about and stuff, ethics, but it is going to be the next frontier for me personally, to make a more interactive task of finding information. And that more interactive task doesn't require another expert, like another human being anymore. So it makes it more accessible to the people. And though kids, in my opinion, anyone who's like less than 20 years old will have a more dynamic interaction with information anytime, anywhere, in any condition, and AI is going to help train them. And that's great. Like, that's utilizing AI for the benefit and health of humanity. How is that going to be monopolized and like business practices, and then people trying to slip in like AI subliminal messaging? That's pretty much what most people are talking about right now, because they belong to the business world, right? They talk about opportunists. When I'm thinking of mental health, I'm thinking about how much AI can replace a human being, because that human being may not always be available. Like, you can't go to your therapist with every little thing anytime, but that AI is available anytime, anywhere. So even if it doesn't come close or identical or substitute for a human being, an expert, it is still more than not having anything at all. So when these companies are saying, shut down this call center because they're using AI and it's unethical and stuff, it's still better than zero. It's also still better than a sick person trying to overwork for low pay. It's still better than someone who's just doing the job but they hate the job. So it at least sets a standard that when someone is about to commit suicide, right? Someone is at their lowest, and this group demonstrated that having even an AI is better than someone missing this person's call. That's why, so as they're bickering about ethics and morality and stuff, all I can see is that dude at least had something that provided a stimuli, as opposed to relying on the fact that one day that firm can't even afford people who want to do the job, right? And then they do a terrible job. It is just as likely that person will take their life than having an AI trained to, based on even the best people out there, and could save a life anytime, anywhere. And that's like a really extreme case, but I'm thinking search engine. I think Microsoft was absolutely brilliant to add it to Bing. They keep making these jokes, like even all the tech channels that I watch keep making this jokes like, well, no one's still gonna use Bing, like Bing's a joke. It's like, but it stands for something. If you're medically inclined and psychologically inclined, you can see that it will make other things difficult, because if you think about it, if it's educating everyone to think critically, then in the future there can be a lot of critical thinkers, and we don't know what a future with a lot of critical thinkers are going to be like, right? Maybe they don't get anything done. That is very possible, but it'll be a different take. There are downsides, and there are pros and cons to too much of things. So in this next frontier, if AI boosts how informed people are, how intelligent or critical thinker they are, what is society going to be like then? Is everyone going to spend hours in mania like me? Like, that's a tough ask. That might actually make mental health even worse. But for now, because I'm not an expert and I don't have hindsight, like foresight, or I'm not universe brain, I think it's a good thing. I can see the practicality of it. However, in later down the line, it could end up making everyone manic, like super manic or super nihilistic. It could make it even worse because everyone starts to overthink everything, right? That's a possibility. But for now, I think there's too much in one way, which is the idea that we have to accept things that are automated. And that's kind of, it goes all the way back to MMO. I'm really dead serious. That line of thought just goes all the way back to MMO, and basically what Neverwinter used to stand for and what World of Warcraft stands for. You interact with different people. Like when you ask, if you go on an MMO and you ask a question, if everyone has the same answer, you're pretty much not an MMO anymore. That's just it. And to this day, everyone's angry at you for being a noob in this game, but at least you get insulted 4 or 5 different ways. That's still more than getting one answer. That's four or 5 different ways that you can deal with or be exposed to an insult. That is still more informative than getting insulted one way 5 times. Because if you get insulted one way 5 times, you normalize that. And when you normalize that, it no longer is informative or a learning experience or even interesting to you. So if you have your parents constantly saying, you suck, eventually you're going to block it out. It will lose its meaning and you would stop exploring. I know this might sound terrible, but there's a silver lining. You might lose exploring. You didn't ask your parents why you think I suck. And then they would say like 4 or 5 things, right? It's like, well, why you think those things? If it's just constantly inundating, you're no longer interested. You don't even explore why that's the case anymore. You don't even talk to your parents anymore, right? And that's kind of the thing that I think about when I'm a teacher, when I'm talking to someone younger. I don't want to be repeating the same thing. I want to encourage them to challenge me or to keep on changing like their perspective. If I keep saying like, oh, you just gotta get good. Just get good. Just work on stamina, you papega. Just keep working on stamina. Did you do your stamina training yet? That's eventually that has 0 effect on a human being. A human being becomes numb and normalize the same stimuli. So as bad as the internet and great as the internet is, when you watch a puppy video and YouTube provides 30 more puppy videos, your new threshold is 30. Tomorrow is going to be 40. The day after is going to be 50. Eventually, YouTube can't provide that anymore and you go numb and you fall out of love in it. And what do? You have no idea how to discover new things. So what do? You go back and look at those puppy videos and you grief. You just ask yourself, well, this is all I got. I'll just keep watching puppy videos and it's just not gonna help, but let me just be depressed at the thing I used to love and I just keep doing it. One of the greatest solutions to that is recommend bird videos. I say, well, birds aren't the same as puppies. It's like, too bad. Here's some bird videos. And you're like, oh, well, after 10 or so of these, I kind of like bird videos. And then you watch 20 bird videos, 30, 40, the same pattern restores, right? But then the internet is like, well, you used to like puppy videos a month or 2 months ago. Here's some puppy videos. And now it's like, all right, you kind of watch both. How about some puppy videos and some bird videos every once in a while? That's kind of the health of a human being. When you saturate yourself on one thing, it's gonna be hard to get out of it. It's really difficult. Once you get in it, is what happens in jobs. When you love something, here's a great one. A hobby. I like this example the best. A hobby is something you love and it's so hard to make time for. When you turn that hobby into a job, you have too much time for that hobby and it becomes a job. And when it becomes a job, you no longer like it. It's not because the hobby changed itself. Your mindset has changed, because when you turn a hobby, which is rare, and you have very little time to do it, to a thing that you do every single day or a living, it's no longer the same thing. Like, what I mean is, to you, subjectively, it's no longer the same thing. But the actual thing is exactly the same. Fundamentally, it's the third dimension. It's time. So when people say, oh, I don't want to turn this into a job, because somehow turning it into a job is the reason it's going to be less interesting, less fun. The source of it not being fun anymore is because you do it too often. The way to make it, to avoid that, is to change your mindset of that job and vary the thing that you're doing. So for example, if you want to successfully, it's a thought experiment. I've done it with a couple of things. A content creator, they play video games for a living, right? Like they want to. Like say a content creator wants to play video games for a living. What is the first thing they can do? Well, they can play the game that they have very little time for, but they absolutely love, and now they want to do a career where they play that game for a living. The first thing they do is get burned out. Eventually, they're going to burn out because now it becomes a thing they do every single day. What you can do is you can do something similar but different enough to the thing you like every single day. You make it into a learning process. So what you do is you double down and proportionately distribute what you used to have as a hobby, but you distribute it to a point where it's separated enough that you don't get burnt out. So you start looking at different aspects of it. And that's what constitutes a healthy job. So when someone says, I'm going to the job to do the same thing, it's too late for them. Like what I mean by it's too late for them, stop that job, recondition, find a balance in your life, go back to the job, do a different perspective on the job, and you might be able to maintain it. The moment you say that you are doing the same thing is the moment you've already passed the point that you've done it too often that it's no longer engaging to you anymore. Even money, like you can equate it to money. Like for example, your motivation is money, and then one day someone's gonna say, I don't get paid enough to do this job. So even the incentive of the money has superseded your normalization and desensitization of the job. That means you have repeated the job so much, it has consumed so much of your time in repetition that even a heavy motivator is not enough. Then you're in it real deep. You're in it past the point that you liked the job originally and decided, hey, I can do this job for a living, and then add on top of it the money it pays, and still that's not enough. So the moment you reach that point, you have to you have to compensate for all your loss of your passion and everything else. That is a midlife crisis. Like that is stored for a grand midlife crisis, and I had that. That's what I'm describing as my burnout period. I had, well, it really isn't money. It's other things like legacy, feeling the reward of seeing students get better, like all that stacked up, and I still burn out. So then when I had to reconstitute, it took a really long time. It just took a lot of, but it doesn't take forever. It takes a really long time. So the more incentives you're piling up, and you're still telling yourself, it feels like I'm just doing the same thing every day. It's like you're in trouble. In my opinion, if someone says that, it's an early red flag, but I don't think you have to start over. Like when someone says phrases like, oh, I'm just gonna go grind this out. Like, well, there's still time. You could say, why do you feel like it's a grind? And then they would say, well, you know, it kind of feels all the samey now, right? All right, well, can I help you with making it less samey? First thing as a friend, as a colleague could do is, hey, you know what? I don't understand this part of what you do. You say you do it all the time. Can you explain that to me? Like, not today, but can you spend the next 2 days writing down something to teach me that thing that you're doing every single day? And the first thing they're probably going to do is going to have a really, really hard time doing that themselves. But it is causing them to think about the way they work because you have obligated them to you. So they have a new task and it's going over the thing they thought they do every day really well. So if you get them to do it, they're going to be like, oh, wait, I actually don't know how to explain this. Like, all right, well, and then they start working on it. And then they come to you and they do that and they realize they have a better appreciation for what they do. So it gets them to appreciate what they do. They are helping you, you benefit as well. And you get to thank them and it reinforces again what they do. And it gives them a better value. Now they gain the value of you. Therapy works in the same way, very similarly. Instead, you get to get them to tell you about their feelings. Is what is my novice opinion of why psychotherapy works. In the sense that I am getting you to tell me what you think you know so well about yourself. But the idea is, the challenge is not to explain it to yourself, the challenge is to explain it to me. And when you actively try to do that, it can be very hard at first because you've already dissociated everything. But the idea is, do you trust me? So you have to establish trust with the person, right? So I believe in you. I want you to get healthier. And that person's like, I trust you. I will open up to you. Say, okay, well, if you open up to me, can you explain that stuff to me? Actively think about how you can explain all the things you think is easy, happens all the time. Explain that to me in the most detail you can. And that activation is the key to reminding them that is what they've been forgetting and taking for granted for a really long time. And in the process, you do your job, you get to help them, and you also have the perfect reason to thank them, and they would believe it. If you give like unequated things, like if you're one-sided, like you lecture them and then you say thank you for your time or thank you for trusting me, it doesn't feel rewarding to the person you're thanking. They have to actively think and feel like they're doing something. So one of the greatest stimuli for most people is when they go numb, when they normalize and get overexposed to something, they stop thinking about what they're doing anymore. Everything just feels pointless. It's no longer active. So your goal as a friend, as a family member, or even a psychologist is to get the other person to actively think about what they're doing again. And in the process, possibly, if at all possible, couple it with a positive thing you control. So in the future, when I ask something like, hey, I've been talking about this game I really, really like. Do you have any thoughts about it? And then someone say, well, I kind of like this game. It's like, well, why do you like this game? And then the first couple of times it could be like, I don't know, I didn't think about it. It's like, well, could you try? Like, think about it as a favor to me. Like, explain to me why you like this thing. Like, I want to really know why you like this thing, or why you don't know. Like, the worst comes to worst, it's like, well, why do you don't know? And then they could say something like, well, I don't really pay attention to these things. And then I'm gonna ask them, like, is there a reason why you don't want to pay attention to them? And they could say something like, it's kind of a hassle, or I don't think deeply about it. It's like, here's a fun challenge. I want you to think of deeply one thing that you like about the thing that you keep saying you love to me, and convince me that I might like it too, or something like that. And it creates an engagement and creates a level of trust that it really isn't for much as much for you as it is for that other person. So that's kind of the idea. And it goes all the way back to needing to deal with things. And MMO was a great place to deal with your insecurities in a game. And the backdrop is, the bottom line is, you're still playing a game. The bottom line is, the place where you can start is problem solving with a video game. But then that video game leads to everything else. So the true MMO experience is playing a game and then learning about someone else. That's what made it a charisma, leadership, development type of game genre. What you play in the game is the easiest thing you can do because it's the most expected thing. Everyone is there to accomplish that task. But the end game in MMO was to how to get people together and do the same thing. That is entirely removed now. Like the current trend of game design is to remove the need to find the people that have the same common interest. Everything about the internet up to this point. Yeah, EverQuest was great back in 1999. Yeah. So everything about the internet, everything about the industry is removing the need to look for something because something else is looking it for you. And that is what I mean by the ends justifies the means, the hustle culture. You are so used to getting hustled, as in straight to the point, not hustled as in like pulling a fast one on someone, like getting, like pretending you're, I'm talking about hustled along as in like sped along. Everything is being sped along. So no longer is the process any important anymore. The process of doing anything is no longer an issue because you always get to the end result. So if you have a mindset like that for the rest of your life, how can you possibly think that you would like to problem solve, or you would like to make friends, or you would like to socialize? And I do not fault anyone who thinks, no, they don't like to do that anymore, because you remove the process. Communication, knowing someone is 99% process. The end game is barely noticeable because there's no end to it, generally speaking. Like, when do you say we can't be better friends anymore? Like, we can't get better as friends. There's no end to a process like that. Your learning has no end. So when you start playing video games provide an end. It provides all the players that you need to be with, all the things you need to learn. So you don't need to learn any of that. You don't need to learn how to learn. You don't need to learn to look for the tools anymore. You don't need to learn to look for friends. You don't need to learn to look for opponents. You don't need to learn any of that. And it's great. It makes people really, really efficient, like super efficient. Like, games are fast, sessions are fast. You complete games really, really fast. Like, achievements, like, what are great review games? For completionists, it's like easy to complete. That would be the first motivation. Like, easy to complete, lots and lots of dopamine, really, really fast. That's 10 out of 10 game. Massive amount of dopamine. Or like action-packed game, action back to back to back, 10 out of 10. The moment the game like slows down, it's like a 4 out of 10. When you slow down, what do you even do? Well, for most people, they do nothing. When I slow down, I don't do nothing. I think about everything that just happened, everything that might happen. What am I doing now? How I feel now? What does this mean? Does the developer want to pause here? There are a lot of things you can be doing in that nothing. But since you don't do that anymore, right? You don't brainstorm during a game. You react. You react to the game. You're playing jerk-like reflexes. You're not reading text anymore. You stop thinking. Using that type of thinking, And you're so good at something else now that, yeah, you're really good at it. Unfortunately, you don't practice anything else either. So, a human being gets a balance of that, and that would be great. It helps you be more adaptive. You don't need it though. What I'm saying is it's optional, but when you're upset, when you're unhappy, and you reach a breaking point or you're feeling like you're losing control, you don't have those tools anymore. And you need to not relearn them, technically. You need to de-rust. You need to de-rust those skills. There's a big asterisk though. There are people growing up today that literally do not get exposed to those skills anymore. Like, what I mean is they just don't get those skills at all. The most extreme case I can think of is homeschooled, only on the internet, withdrawn from parents. If you're withdrawn from your family, you are homeschooled somehow, that's not your parent, and you are on the internet selectively only looking at the things you want to look at. That is a significant margin of people, like significant margin of early teenagers are that now, where that means they have no more random inputs, just absolutely no inputs. The first thing you would say is they're probably depressed by 13 years old. And then they'll continue to be incredibly even more depressed when they start approaching an age that they think, oh no, their parents are going to kick them out. And then even more depressed when they decide like, oh, their parents are not going to be around forever. And then it keeps escalating until one day someone lights a fire under their butt and they have to learn all that all at once. Like, imagine an 18-year-old that finds out, hey, you know, pretty much 95% of the people in the rest of the world probably will disagree with you the moment you step out of your house and the internet. And that sucks. Like, how are you gonna learn the rest of the universe in like 1 month when you run out of money or something, or you get kicked out and you have to learn the rest of everything so fast? Usually you have 18 years of life to get, you know, a sprinkling, a microdose of a lot of things. There's some things you hate, some things you like, some things you just don't understand and you forgot. But usually all that culminates into a human being that accepts, stuff just happens, right? That just happens. That's life. And we could build a whole society on the internet. It is possible. I don't know what the future is going to hold. The whole future could just be completely automated and be online, and all those peeps are all good. But for now, this very moment, I know that the vast majority of your life doesn't actually take place on the internet. You might be thinking, no, it feels like all my time's on the internet. You sleep more than you're on the internet. Like, sleep and eating combined will take up more time than the internet. So it's not difficult to convince someone that the internet is not their entire life. So what do? You practice making your sleep better, eating better, and heck, you might as well practice breathing better. Because breathing is no contest. If you're asking me, you breathe less than being on the internet, that's gonna be a hard one for anyone to believe. So you can work on breathing. What's a great way to improve your breathing? Go running outside. Go walking. Exercising. Anything improves your breathing. What improves your sleep? Walking outside. Exercising. You know? Like, so there are a lot of facets of your life that in behind the frame, like in the internet world, is excluded from your mind. So sleeping doesn't exist anymore because you're not reminded of it anymore. So when you're on the internet, what's the last thing you're thinking about is going to bed, right? Like if you get a really great dopamine and all that, the last thing you're thinking about is going to bed. So how would you realistically ever think long enough about going to bed to even improve going to bed? By improving your quality of sleep, improving your health, improving the way you solve problems if you never have problems. My favorite example is if you only care what you think, and the internet provides everything you only care about and never provides you with things that you don't care about, how can you ever learn to care about anything else other than yourself? It's going to be very difficult. And the first time you get to learn that is you realize you think you care about another person, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, and you realize you have no skills in securing that relationship because you didn't practice it. The whole time you've been just practicing what you care about. How could you possibly ever form a connection with someone else? And that is really cold, but it's also very reasonable, and I am not blaming that person. You have to practice. You're gonna have to learn. So what does that correlate with? It correlates with the plummeting of the first relationship success. It also is so strong that the second relationship plummets in success as well. Usually it's the third and the fourth relationship that is okay, and that rarely even leads to marriage anymore, because it takes all that amount of time to learn again. Because if you're on the internet, you don't really learn that anymore. You don't learn how to get along with someone you don't get along with at first. You just ignore them, just ban them, never talk to them again. It's not like that you'll ever see them again, right? So, but the challenge here is the next time you have an opportunity to resolve a conflict, see how rusty you are. You know? That's kind of my 2 cents. Like, only once in a while. Don't go like crash diet kind of thing, right? I'm not saying, which is what self-help books unfortunately encourage. Like, if there's anything I'm a little worried about self-help book is the hustle culture nature of self-help books, which is basically, oh, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they're like, oh, I don't do that, I don't do this, I don't do that. So if I just do all of these things all at once for the next 10 days, I'll see a really fast turnover. Well, it's more like, if I had to make this not sound like a monetized thing, which I know some people will probably monetize this, and they probably already do this now. My goal, I think an effective way to try to mimic psychotherapy in a self-help manner that's natural is you provide one advice that's as thoroughly investigated as possible. One advice, make it like a 50 to 100 page book, right? Release it and only sell it for 1 week in a calendar year. Okay, so 2014, or like say 2023, the first volume is released. Okay, in the next year, the second volume will be released for 1 week, and it will only be available to the people who can prove they read volume 1, and then reissue volume 1 to everyone that they can prove that hasn't bought volume 1 or 2. What does that sound like? That sounds like school, doesn't it? But that is the natural way of why schools take a really long time to educate you on foundations of problem solving. Yeah, you know, you learn about history and like math and reading and stuff, but in the process, you also learn how to solve problems. how to study enough so you have free time to play video games, how to deal with your friends, how to deal with your bullies, personal favorite of mine, how to deal with bullies, how to gain self-esteem, how to succeed. All that stuff is inherent in schools. The problem is that's not the focus of the school. And to me, as an educator, or I wanted to be an educator, I wanted to emphasize that somehow. Balance semantic knowledge, which now the internet provides in inundation. So it's not even, now I even feel like school should be turned over to how to utilize the internet to find information, and then just teach the problem solving aspect. Like, how do you discern, how do you utilize tools? Because now the internet, but schools are falling behind, in my opinion. Like, formal education is not changing as rapidly, and it's difficult because it involves millions of people, legislation, politician, but it's hard to reform schools to meet the pace of technology. It is working on it. Like the whole ChatGPT thing is going wild, because ChatGPT like changes every 6 months, and schools don't change. They might change like 20 years. It takes like 20 years to change around schools. But the idea is, schools, in my opinion, that's what teachers are in the future. They are the individuals, the adults that will be able to educate people on how to use tools. That's usually what happened when you, here's a great example. We did do this in formal education. How to use the library Dewey Decimal System. That used to be a thing. How to research things. That used to be a thing. How to use the scientific method. That is still a thing. All these things are kind of a thing, but it's not the center focus. With the internet, it can be a thing now, because you don't need to inundate kids to memorize things in order to teach them a lesson about how to memorize things. You can't. The difficulty is these skills need a task so that you can let the kids develop those skills. And the more successful they are at developing the skills, the better their grades are. And unfortunately, the only thing I can tell you is it's a one-size-fits-all model. So if you didn't get good grades, that's why I can tell kids, if you failed school, it doesn't mean you're incompetent. It's just you didn't have the proper stimuli to train and motivate yourself to find your method, your balance of problem solving. You were unable within that time, that environment, to develop your skills to solve the problem, the task. And the schools can do only so much. They pick the statistical likelihood. So it applies to the majority of students. They would eventually develop sufficient problem solving and all that stuff that I was talking about by the end of 12 years. Unfortunately, if you're not one of them, it doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means whatever was provided was not enough. So you get it elsewhere. And the idea is of providing an opportunity for that, and hope that you don't reach an age that would present too much obligation on the person to have enough time to do that. But the internet can remove all of that. Like, you could even use AI to train people. Here's a great one about AI. Soon, they've already been testing this. A few select companies, I'll let you guess who they are, where in the future, your NPCs will respond with machine learning, and they will be coordinated with like deep fake technology, like dynamic technology, where it will make the NPC emote specifically in the context of the response. So in the future, you could be like, hey, could you get the sword for me? It's in the lake. You could do something like, wait, why do you need the sword in the lake? And then the AI will come up with something clever like, well, you know, it's an heirloom, it's priceless. It's like, wait. But how did it end up in the lake? it will respond with something natural, right? Or at least more than needing someone to predict you're going to ask that. The downside is it also has limitations in how it responds, right? Because it uses a sample size, it uses a data set, but it does also remove creativity, like other people who create like dialogue to be very flamboyant or something. But that is the future of things like this. You will start interacting in a way that gives the player the opportunity. In my opinion, I'm always thinking about the player, right? Generally speaking, because the player can ask any type of question, it will be a constant reminder and opportunity for the player to exercise just shenanigans. I kid you not, here's a silver lining to the whole thing where when ChatGPT was integrated into Bing, the first thing the internet did immediately was try to get ChatGPT to do naughty things. Like really naughty things. Like just break ChatGPT. Now here's the thing. I haven't seen any great example of human engagement, self-motivated human engagement than that. Isn't it amazing? Like, they figured out how to break it. Like, how much human power is there? Like, that's untapped resources. But because of the way our games work and our search engine works, it's not fun or engaging to do anything. It's just you enter it and the task is done. So you no longer have an incentive. But when ChatGPT was integrated in Bing, the first incentive was try to break it. And it happened like overnight. That's how not stupid the internet is. The internet, people using the internet are not stupid. They are really competent, but they just don't have anything to engage them anymore. Like, when I ask someone a question on Neverwinter, like this happens, or I don't ask the question, someone else do. So the first thing is they would ask like, oh, so what do I do here? It's like, just Google it. Here's the YouTube link. Immediately that person is incompetent. That just shows a lack of full incompetence. Like they basically can't even bother to explain what they think they know really well and say, oh no, don't be a noob, just Google it. Here's the video, here's the goat. It's like, well, have you tried explaining it? Because the first thing I would think is a person who, and this is a little rough and this can be a little bit cold, but if I ask someone, hey, what's your thought on this? And the moment they say like, oh no, you know, here's a link, it will summarize everything, so that you stop caring about me and you stop caring about your own competence. Like you stop engaging in it. It's no longer interesting to you. Like, oh, I can't be bothered to explain this. From my perspective, you either didn't do it ever, you did it so many times, it's boring now. So there's a lot of reasons, right? But all that leads to is you don't care about it anymore. Like, either you said it too many times before and it's no longer interesting. That's from a teacher perspective. You think it's not worth your time immediately. You did it yourself and just look up a guide, so you didn't even do the process in the first place, so you can't possibly explain it. Those are like 95% of that. That's what that person is telling me. When a person links me something and still can't add anything to it, it can mean all those things, but all of them leads to the idea that it is no longer important to them now. They no longer want to explain it to you. That is both unprofessional, if they are professional, if they claim to be a professional, or that is an expert that no longer thinks that information is interesting and important to being an expert at it. Like, for example, You could be so good at Osu, and the only advice you have is just practice more. So everything you've done up to that point is no longer important because you can no longer relate to it emotionally or intellectually. So when I say you know a good teacher, a good coach, a good mentor from a bad mentor, when I say bad, I mean inappropriate, as in if you're looking for someone to mentor you or instruct you, the first check is to see if they can even repeat something. Like, hey, could you explain this to me? It's like, oh, this is relatively easy. You can check out these books. Leave. That's a red flag. They no longer care enough to even explain it. That means if they don't care enough to explain it, they're no longer practicing it either. So they've lost touch with foundation. They lost touch with someone who don't know that information. If you're an expert and you're talking to another expert, you cut to the chase. You don't even ask those questions. So that's the realm of, are there stupid questions? Well, when an expert talks to an expert, there are stupid questions. But you're not looking for that. If you're someone who is uneducated, who needs to know something, the moment you say, oh, this might be a stupid question, and that person says, no, here, let me just explain to you from the very start. That is the guy that still knows what it's like to not know anything. If they say, yeah, well, it's kind of stupid. Like, well, get out. That's not the person that you're looking for. That person doesn't have time to waste with, the beginning details. And it's not to be offensive at all. It's just this person emotionally is no longer there. Their mindset is not, they're not prepared anymore or practiced to talk to someone from scratch. That's the Neverwinter community. It was going to go back to MMOs and Neverwinter community at some point. That is the Neverwinter community. They do not bother anymore with welcoming new players. And what I mean by welcoming new players, I'm not talking about typing welcome new player. Those are pleasantries. It is low effort, low barrier. It barely uses any type of process or problem solving. No, it's not that person who goes step by step rehearsing. It's like, wait, what do I do? Okay, I do this and then this, and you just type it out. Instead, it's, hey, check out this YouTube. All the things you need to know is in this convenient spreadsheet. And then, my first thing is, do you even know what's on the spreadsheet anymore? And then my first question is, do you know that this spreadsheet is out of date? The first thing I check when someone says, oh, I'll just use this link, and I'll just use this link. What engages me the most is I look to see if that information is even up to date. And even if it answers my question that I originally asked. The likely case is, the worse it is at answering my question, the more outdated it is, the more incompetent that other person is. Competence is not a one-time deals all. If you learn something, you are not competent in that skill. You are only competent for as long as you practice that skill. And that's kind of the rough coldness. And it goes all the way back to dissociation, normalization of repetitive behavior, and desensitizing and resensitizing, and then reevaluation of yourself. All that stuff keeps you on your toes. Complacency sucks. And that's why when someone asks me, where did I get my PhD in? I tell them I got it in biology, but I wouldn't say I have a PhD in biology anymore because, gonna be fair, it only takes like 5% of my life now. And 5% is not enough to remain competent in biology. I don't practice psychology. I talk about psychology, but I don't practice it. So I'm not going to tell people I'm competent in psychology or psychotherapy. I know things about psychotherapy. There's a very big difference between practicing a skill and knowing about a skill. And all that hopes in line to hope that someone who actually practices the skill, someone who actually makes video games like Cryptic on Neverwinter, someone who does a skill, takes my opinions and use it to inform them of what they might want to do to get someone like me to do what they want to do. So that's kind of the idea of commentary. It's kind of the idea of skill sharing. Would you say you were with molecular biology if you attended conferences and such regular to stay up to date? I would be in the know. I would know a lot about molecular biology, but I wouldn't be able to have any practical problem solving. So I would lack all the problem solving problems. So like nowadays, I don't even know what people struggle with in the lab. Like what, for example, when you go to conferences, you see data, methodology and whatnot, but you see only what works. That's the limitation of conferences and peer review things. You only see what works. And unfortunately, you lose all the experience of what doesn't work. And that's privileged knowledge too. So because it's privileged knowledge due to lack of resources. So what I mean is when you fail, negative data, they don't get reported. And it's more valuable. Yeah. Knowing there are exponential amount of things that don't work than do work in science. And the problem with that is it's hard to exponentially report in a meaningful way, sustainable way, and an organized way of the 300 to 400 times more things that don't work than the things that do work. And the problem with that is then when I go and take that knowledge that do work and try to use it, I have no knowledge or experience of what doesn't work. So what happens? I spend most of the time hitting all the things that don't work because I lack experience. It's the crux of being a scientist is not what gets published, in my opinion. 95% of the time is what didn't work. And that what didn't work made you so good at figuring out the exact conditions and problem solving that gets you that one time that the things work. And then hopefully that thing is reproducible under those very specific conditions consistent enough to report a potential fact that is relatively accurate in order to bolster a body of knowledge that's confirmed. But all that other stuff that don't work, it's gone. It's just evaporated. And guess what? If that was able to be cataloged in some way, it would so greatly increase the efficiency of difficult problem solving. But there's no amount of structure or money or incentive to make you want to do that yet. Like there's no way of doing that yet. AI might help, like how to log, how to organize, maybe in the future an AI powered machine that takes in all the inputs of every failed experiment, and then people can just like register failed experiments and conditions and throw them at an AI, and then the AI would crunch and come up with a browsable database of everything that failed. I could see that being the future. Like it would greatly enhance. So like in the future, like, oh, I have an idea, type it in, cross check, AI checks all the possible interactions. It's like, no, someone has already done this. It doesn't work. Try something else. The downside is it will also halt random experimentation because now you have to come up with something novel. And that sucks. Because now you're competing with everyone. So how do you find something new that you haven't already tried with a limited amount of tools? Like we don't have all the tools. Like in science, there's a limited number of gold standard tools. And then when you use them, if they don't work, then you need more information in order to make a new tool so that it can gather new information. But making tools and coming by valuable tools takes decades of innovation in science. And you know, if you're lucky, you might get 2 or 3 grand innovations in science before you die of old age, and you might not even see if it worked or not. That's the tough part. So yeah, I would say even if I keep up with all the books like molecular biology and stuff, it would make me no more appealing as a senior scientist in molecular biology. Like if I was applying to a senior position, because I am technically qualified for that, the moment they hear that I've been out of the lab for 4 years is the moment that it would make me no more than a kid studying in college, right? The kid can remember and regurgitate the same information that I can. I have no experience, no more experience, relative experience. But the silver lining is I at least still have legacy experience that is slightly more than the kid. So, but the kid could just have 1 year of laboratory experience. It would supersede my maybe 12 years of old experience, because time moves on. My skills get rusty. My skills get outdated. It's no longer applicable. So it's very, very fair, even when it hurts, that seniority doesn't accommodate a profession that requires competence. That's what competence means to me. It doesn't mean what you learn. It means what you are currently practicing. You can fall out of competence when you do not practice something. And you can fall out of competence with your emotions. And that's what I did before. And I'm not only probably happier in general for revisiting and trying to rekindle my like angry self, like a person I forgot kind of thing. You can legitimately dissociate yourself completely from the ability to feel properly. And here's a fun trivia that is not gloomy, it's just worth noting. Males have easily, globally, the highest misinterpretation of the source and nature of their emotional reaction. I think it's relatively reasonable to say anyone who has collected data to this date, globally, it is statistically significant, in my opinion, still, because I would still have to like validate all that, but it is very safe bet that it's still true today that males statistically have a poor interpretation of their emotional intelligence. Like what I mean is, when push comes to shove, if you analyze their behavior and you ask them like, were you angry there? They would misinterpret what would be interpreted as anger. What would be interpreted like, you know, if you ask someone who's relatively young, especially a male, it's also true for females, but what I mean is, based on their conditioning, it correlates and it co-varies with their activities that they do. Like, are they constantly engaged in emotional intelligent things or not? Males tend to engage less in emotionally intelligent scenarios most of the time. They are avoidant most of the time because of, you can call it culture or whatever, or genetics, or whatever your favorite theory is. It's just, this is what is observed, right? And when you ask them things like, were you irritated there, frustrated, or angry, it would be very, very difficult for a vast majority of males to identify the difference between irritation and like sadness and gloom. Like those are nuances, but Those are nuances that have very important. It doesn't have to be the right answer. It just has to be a consistent answer, and it's very difficult. Like sometimes, like it's very important about the anger thing, because it's hard to distinguish what is healthy anger, intentful anger, and like reactive anger if you can't even define when you're angry out of frustration, or you're angry out of hopelessness, or you're angry out of, like, what triggers that anger is very important, and differentiating between anger helps you take control of it. But a lot of times the thing is, it's just anger. So when someone who's emotionally intelligent would come up to this person and say, wow, it sounds like you're just annoyed at it, but you're not really malicious. Like, what do you mean? It's just anger. Like, well, there's a difference between being malicious and frustrated or confused. Like, you can all that can be expressed as anger, but in general, males perform worse. Males tend, and it's increasing in my opinion. I would even argue it's probably increasing for both males and females. Like, not that we're comparing males and females, we're just talking about males just have a more exaggerated climb. So now you're saying like, well, why are you angry? It's like, well, you know, this guy's stupid. It's like, so is that because, so you're angry because he doesn't know? You're angry because you want him to know? You're angry because you know better? Like, so it's very difficult to know, to characterize the anger. And without being able to characterize the anger, you can't possibly solve it. Like, you can't problem solve it. It's like one day you're gonna be like, oh, I'm so angry, I just don't know why. Like, well, that's a very typical response. That's a lack of emotional intelligence. You just chalked it in. It's like, I'm angry, so I don't know, it's not important. It's anger, I should suppress it. Sweep it away, right? So one day, even healthy anger is right under the rug. So ironically, your solution to control your anger becomes the very reason that you're having an unhealthy relationship with your emotional intelligence. You have gotten so good at lumping all the stuff together, you have stopped learning about it altogether. So now you have no idea why you keep feeling the same anger, in which you quickly sweep away so fast that the solution is knowing that. Like, now you're so detached, it's like, how do you solve it? Well, it's the thing you practice sweeping away. So now you can no longer do it. It's the chicken or the egg. Like, you swept both the chicken and the egg away. Now you have nowhere to start and nowhere to end. So who's the only other possible solution? Someone outside you. Your strength is to have the courage to find someone outside you to unsweep your generalization and practice again. Like, practice getting angry at different things and figuring out how those things are different. Then one day you can choose to throw a ball very, very hard and fast because you want to, and then the next day not get angry because someone hit you with a ball. Or you get really, really angry and you throw the ball even faster because you got frustrated that you can't throw a ball that fast. Those are all different things. You can apply anger in a controlled way, in an intent way, to keep yourself sensitized to exploring your anger. If you sweep all of it away, you no longer practice that anymore. You no longer practice how to manage your anger. You no longer how to apply your anger. You no longer know how to read anger. You can't empathize with anger anymore. So in the future, when someone's angry, you're just going to tick them off because you have no idea what that feels like anymore. It's not like you experience it anymore. So that's my fear. When I started depreciating over time and becoming numb, my teaching, like the way I talk to people, I got even worse. Like, I became less charismatic, things got harder. Interviews got staler. Like there were tough times because I no longer am relatable. I'm no longer charismatic because everything is void of emotion, and the people that you stop practicing reading yourself, let alone reading others. So you in the future, like, you would say something, it's like, I have no idea why you're upset, like, this is the truth. It's like, yep, that's it. The biggest red flag for someone is when someone says it's not mean if it's the truth. That's a person that hasn't been practicing at all. If you keep saying things like, oh, it's not mean if it's true, or that's okay, he's just being genuine, it's like you stop practicing empathy. Not only that, you probably don't even understand your own emotions anymore, because you spend so much time convincing yourself that you practice it, yet you sweep it away by saying excuses. So like, when I tell someone, like, it's been a while since I felt sad, I'm sorry that I can't really. So someone died recently, right? Like, and they're feeling really down, and the first thing I would tell them is like, I'm sorry, it's been a really long time and I just don't know what to do in this situation, but I hope what I'm saying resonates with you. But I don't resonate with you. Like, I don't know how to feel when someone important dies for someone. Like, when someone has someone they love die, I don't know how to feel. So I have to remind myself I have no practice with that. Like, I can't do that. So the things I say I can actively focus on. Maybe what I say, I can try to associate how that person reacts, because I no longer practice that. I haven't ever encountered that. It goes the same with everything you try to suppress, everything you try to rewire, you don't practice that anymore. If you never feel sad, you're just never going to be able to put your mindset in that anymore. And that means it makes you terrible as a person who helps other people with sadness. And that's kind of one of the downsides to experts. Or, like, what I mean is, when people look for experts, they look for people who are not in their position. Like, logically, you would say, I'm a sad person, I should look for a happy person to make me happy. But it's superficial, it's on top. It's like, yeah, sure, you definitely look for a happy person, but you want to look for someone who is capable or have been sad before. So when you think of misery deserves company is one of the biggest downsides, defaults, initially it feels great. Like, if you grieve together, it's very heartwarming and great. But death is like that event happens once, it's not persistent. But when you're looking for advice for depression, right, like someone who's depressed, hanging out with someone else who's depressed, the depression doesn't go away. The stimulus continues to be there. Whatever they're depressed about, you're going to continue to be depressed. So while it feels great to be next to the person, neither of you have practiced how to get out of it. So then the golden goose is to find someone who was recently depressed, who is no longer depressed. So that is a compromise in which this person still remembers how it feels to be in your position, but they also have the mindset fresh in their minds of how to get out of it. And that's tough, because experts who are consistent at doing these things may no longer feel those things. So in the end, it's kind of tricky. And the great experts are in my opinion, the great coincidental experts are the ones who continue to ebb and flow between them. So that's why psychotherapy, in my opinion, can be one of the biggest drawbacks is a hit and miss. The resonance may not be there, and it's pros and cons. You want them to resonate enough to be able to make the breakthrough, but you also don't want them to resonate too much so that they compromise their objectivity, right? Their ability to offer the other advice. Because if there's an expert that's depressed, they're probably going to stay depressed with you, and they're probably only going to hyper focus on the depression. It's going to compromise their ability to get out. But the idea is learning and investing in people in the past is far more valuable than you think. And you can become very impressively efficient at accurately, mostly, deducing people using the least amount of time if you make communication more active. So when I talk about like flags and deductions and stuff, one of three things, is to narrow your margin. It's not for profiling or discrimination, generally speaking, but unfortunately, historically, people have used it for profiling in a negative sense and deduction in a negative sense, in a prejudicial way, right? For me, it's an opportunity for me to get to understand a person faster. I want to keep improving how quickly I can to extract as much information by asking the fewest questions, but not less questions. That's kind of the biggest difference that I feel most people confuse with. Oh, you're just assuming things about people, so you're not going to ask questions. Like, no. The number of questions I ask are going to stay as much as I can possibly the other person tolerate. What I'm saying is I'm getting the most out of my answers. Because if I can squeeze in more questions and get more out of my answers, it means I learn even more in less time. That is the power of deduction and like conditioning and being worldly. You get more out of it, and it saves both. It doesn't save the other person time, but it saves me time. And it's a selfish thing, but it also makes me more accurate, more charismatic, more be able to talk like 3 hours straight about a topic, still wind it back and make it sound a little bit interesting, right? Because I need to extract as much as I can from an audience. Even if it's one person, I want to go ham. Like, my ham is like 400 times faster than someone else, for example, who doesn't practice it at all. So when someone asks a question and say, well, I only believe whatever they tell me because I don't want to assume anything about them or presume anything about them. It's like, well, you're cutting your ability. You can do both. You can only believe what they're telling you that they confirm, but you can continuously practice presuming, deducing in your head. You can even share it with them. That's what I do. Like, say, but what if they call you out on a presumption or an assumption? I'll tell them I did it, and I can explain why I do it. And then in the future, I will explain to them why it benefits me as a person, and I think it benefits a lot of people as a person, as people involved in conversation. It constantly makes it fun, possibly, or active when you're talking to someone. It makes you less likely to forget about details. It makes you more invested in the conversation. If I actually prefer someone who is fishing for an answer from me than someone who is passively telling me how good my day is or how my day is. Because if they're fishing for something from me or they're trying to get me to say something, they are at least actively trying to manipulate me instead of saying, hi, how's your day? Because that's nothing. Nothing's happening. That person's probably throwing out that phrase because it's normal and they do it all the time. It absolutely means nothing to them. What I'm saying is, to most people, there are people you can read them. Like, someone say, oh, how are you? And I'm like, I'm doing okay. And then someone's like, you're only doing okay. The last 3 days you said you were doing wonderful. What changed? That's a different story, right? This person is actively looking for an answer even in the pleasantries. So it's not inherent to the pleasantry, it's inherent to the person who's throwing out the phrase. So when I say I don't really engage in pleasantries, that's what I mean. When I say something, if you accuse me of looking for something or learning something or intending something, you are right. And you have called my bluff. If I ever tell you, nah, there's no motivation behind me to repeating that statement, no, I do it with intent because I love maximizing what I'm doing. So if I trip up on a word, usually it's not unintentional. The wife and I bump heads on that. I only ask because I want to know. Get upset when she just responds with the how are you? Yeah. But so here's the challenge, right? When you bump heads, the goal now is how do you make it so I know this sounds a little manipulative, but it's kind of a fun challenge for myself all the time. When someone is non-responsive, like talking to a kid, like talking to a younger person who is really shy, anxiety, and whatnot, you can get to, if you have that mindset still, you can get into the mindset like, well, how do I get them not to do that? Just like with, how do we get them to make it feel like it's their idea and then make them feel natural and then they would join in, right? So the idea is, it engages you to do something else, while at the same time it can be a forward investment in the person that basically you love. So no amount of investment is too much, right? So for a kid, when I see someone say like, wow, they just don't say anything at all, like they just keep saying, oh, it was all right. It's like, just all right. Is that kind of like, oh, this is what I do sometimes, and whoever hears me say this, they probably know who they are. But I sometimes when someone says like, oh, I'm all right, it's like, is that a all right as in I'm better than yesterday, or is that an all right that I'm not better than yesterday and I'm hanging on? Or maybe does that mean you're just coping, or are you all right as in things are sunshine and rainbows? So what I did there was to make them consider something. And when they pick something, it will feel more like they had to do something to it. And it could irritate them. Absolutely. It could definitely irritate them. But if you do it twice, 3 times, 4 times, guess what they'll do eventually? They'll be like, all right. And before you ask, it's more of an all right as in it's the same as yesterday. And that's it. They're on their way. Like what I mean is you've caused them to say more than just all right. And in the long run, they might turn it back on you. And they might get irritated. They might even go at you and be sarcastic and take a jab at you. But whatever it is, it's still more than passively passing the day and just saying non-essential, non-meaningful things, right? And you're skirting around, not pushing too hard to cause a strife, but you're also trying to tug at slight emotions. Because if you don't explore those things, eventually either it all fades away or it gets suppressed so much that eventually it's just gonna burst and you're gonna have the giant confrontations, like the ginormous confrontations that there's no like coming back from it. It's just not possible to come back from it. Or you just fade and drift apart, and that destroys relationships both ways, like both extremes eventually destroys the relationship. Friends, family, siblings, parents, it destroys it. So the idea is you're just always constantly skirting good ones and little ones back and forth. And the idea is to just keep getting people to do a little things that might not seem like it means anything, but in the long run it does. Soon you'll have inside jokes. Soon you'll have jabs. Soon you'll like say things that mean 3 different things because it kept lumping together. And then in the future, when that person goes and associates with someone else, they'll have stories. They'll also have attachments to all those phrases. Soon, like I'll give a personal example between me and the guys. A singular word can have like 15 different meanings, and sometimes we don't get it right. Like, they could mean that word in that meaning, but I could mean it in a different meaning, and then we get confused, but in the end, we're still implying more meaning than just the word itself. Things like Papega, Monka S, or I say meep sometimes quite a bit. Like, all those words become exponentially confusing, but also the nature of its confusion creates constant active conversation, and that constant active conversation makes it not a passive thing. You're not just saying, honey, I'm home, like, how was your work? It was okay. And then the other person says, how was your work? Like, it was okay. Gone. The conversation just ends. Like, there's no filter, there's no vulnerability, there's no invitation, there's no assumption of more interaction. And then eventually, at first, the passion and motivation would probably give more talk, like, oh, so what was okay about your work and stuff, right? But eventually, you either drift apart and just not say anything anymore because you heard everything. And the idea is, you heard everything before, like the dreaded, oh, we told everybody, like, you and I know each other for so long, we ran out of things to say to each other. So how do we increase that? Well, before we focus on finding something new to share with each other, like, you can do the social experiment that people usually do. It's like, oh, save something for later, and I'll save something for later, and we'll share it. It's like, that's really pragmatic, it's very logical. But there's one big problem. You're thinking about the end. What is the process? Well, the process is you have to go look for something first. The other person has to go look for something first regularly. If the two of you haven't been practicing on looking for something new already for like 20 years, you just wait for your job to provide experience. Agreeing to that social experiment, it's not going to happen. It's going to happen once and you never do it again because you didn't practice it. So you have to lean into it. So the first thing you would agree on, a more natural experiment, would be something like something easier, something closer to home. It's like, hey, we always tell each other that our days are okay. All right, for tomorrow's challenge, let's just take any note of something that is not okay. That's it. Just not okay. It could be better. It could be worse. It could just be weird. Just not okay. So you lower the barrier as low as possible. Possibly possible. And then start there. And the great thing about that is you're starting to learn to lean in. And then you can be more specific. It's like, all right, tell me something exciting, right? So you can move up. But the thing is, the first thing most people do is they jump to the end. They think like, oh yeah, just tell me what is the most exciting thing happened to tomorrow. Yeah, we'll challenge each other to find the most exciting thing. It's like, holy heck, that's so exhausting. Like, you go from not telling each other anything because you ran out of things to tell about, and you're gonna go out of your way to consistently look for something that is very, very selective and stringent. Like, for example, I did this earlier on before by accident, like inadvertently, and then I realized how like weak it is. It's not a great example. Like, it didn't work very well, and I was thinking, how do you improve upon it? And that's the idea. Like, I ask someone like, oh yeah, if you're gonna go on a walk, here's a challenge. Tell me if you can see anything interesting on your walk, right? So that usually works sometimes, but it requires a lot of commitment. And depending on the stranger you're meeting, that's a really high threshold, even for interesting. And so you swap it up and try to make it more inclusive, so it requires less and less effort. And you could start with something like, you could phrase it even better, like, tell me if you noticed anything about your walk, like anything that lingers. Tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you come back from walk and you're talking to me. What is the first thing on your mind? And that would be just as low effort as possible. And then eventually, if you do that often enough, that person would be like, well, let's just not think about the first thing that comes to mind. Let's just think about something else. Like, they would start to be normalized. They would look forward or be conditioned to tell you something when you do it more often enough, right? It becomes, and then don't stop there, right? Because if you keep doing the same thing, it will become less interesting over time. So you evolve it. So in the future, like 4 or 5 times and alone, when you get the confirmation that that person is willing to do that, the next thing you do is like, hey, you know what? Tell me something interesting the next time you go on a walk. And then you can go even deeper, like, you can involve more things like, well, try solving a problem when you go on a walk and tell me about what that problem is. And then so on. So it gets deeper, it gets more taxing, but it won't feel like that for the other person, because that person rehearsed. First they thought about anything, then they thought about something interesting, then they thought about something exciting, then they got a task to do. So all that lean in, all those those things will be automated. Like, it will be so routine that they don't even notice it was effortful in the first place. So that's kind of like treating your brain like a muscle, like treating your brain like training. You're leaning into it. And a lot of times, in my opinion, when I think back to all the teenage relationship drama that I witnessed, I wasn't ever in a relationship, so I can't really say how to feel in those situations. But the objective nature of it, like the way they argue, the way they disagree and agree, and what ends the relationship, what doesn't, that type of stuff is often due to extreme emotional compromise. So the emotions are gone, right? Your emotions are just all over the place. And because of that, often is taking extreme measures. Measures become so extreme, and you lose track of what you can and cannot do yet. And by what I mean by can and cannot do, I don't mean ones and zeros. I mean what you can do sustainably. So for example, your first fight. Well, you can't solve your first fight. You never even solved a fight yet. So as an adult, or as someone, back then I was a kid too, so I couldn't have done it as a kid. But as an adult looking back, you want to start small. The first thing to solve a fight is not to focus on solving the fight first. Figure out what you're fighting about. That's something those kids know. Like, if you jump straight to the end, how can you solve something you never even know why it began in the first place? So you start small. You ask them, well, what is upsetting you here? And what's upsetting you here? Can we hear this? What does this sound like? This sounds like marriage counseling, doesn't it? Like, so I'm just breaking down some popular approaches that I know are like relationship, counseling stuff, right? And not a professional, right? Not a professional. But the idea is you focus first on the things you know how to do before leaning into something you don't know how to do yet. So You ask, is this your first relationship? How often do you fight? Like, if this is your first fight, you must appeal to them and say, if you haven't ever been in a fight before in this specific context, why do you think you can solve it in the first place? Let's start somewhere that you both can agree on and understand, has a chance to understand first. So define the problem, define each person's interpretation of the problem, and then do slow measures to alleviate that problem, and do not provide a guarantee that it would fix itself overnight. And if it does fix itself overnight, we do the antibiotics approach. In my opinion, is the antibiotics approach is, well, you got lucky this time. Finish your medicine. Go all the way. Like, I know you guys are feeling better. You magically, that little small step, somehow you saw the end and both of you resolved the problem. It's like, no. Go through the steps and get to the end. Like, just slowly go through the steps and still get to the end. I know you saw it all. Just go through the steps. It's kind of like a kid, right? The kid sees you're getting, like, you give a kid an obstacle. How to jump over a box, right? And the kid just immediately is like, they fail the first time they jump over the box. It's like, well, all right. They wing it again and they luck out and jumped over the box. You ask the kid, like, so what was different the second time with the first time? It's like, I don't know, but I did it. It's like, well, all right. Slow down, kid. What did you do first? What did you think first? Because they hadn't learned anything from the process. They got lucky. And relationships are built not on luck, in my opinion. If you start building a relationship on luck, it's going to crumble. And I'm not even talking about, like, marriages. I'm actually just talking about friendships, like the most basic form. Trust, loyalty between people. It's built on foundations. It's built on time and rigor and diligence. If you get lucky, like, for example, you meet someone, I love FromSoft, you love FromSoft, we're best friends now, that friendship isn't gonna last. You can get really, really lucky and hope you keep lucking into more things. Sure, absolutely. That happens all the time because that's how people make friends. Most of the time, nowadays. I don't build friends like that. How many friends did I make and lose? 0. I haven't made a friend that I lost because I don't see it that way. But here's the big deal, though. One big disclaimer, though. I didn't try to make friends until really late in life because of my predisposition, like my environmental thing, where, like, you know, racism and discrimination. It was very difficult to do that, but I haven't stopped, invested, and have a connection with someone that I have been considered friend with, because I don't invest in the short game, I invest in the long game. And that's what I mean by when I was young, I was really old already. So I was terrible at making friends when I was younger. But as I grew older, thankfully, like, my inexperience with how young people feel made me want to figure out how young people feel. So then I try to secure those friendships as well as I can while not being young again. So now I just have friends that ranges from, like, a 13-year-old all the way to, like, someone who is, like, 60, like my 20 years my senior. And the idea is to keep yourself fresh. You have to keep yourself willing to feel young and willing to feel old. So yeah, I talk about death. I talk about suicide. I talk about end-of-life legacy things. But I also talk about how it's funny when paint dries. Or I still watch Pinocchio for the 10th time in a row, that kind of thing. It's still not very possible for an active, busy lifestyle, but for me, it's fun. Like, human behavior is so fun. So that's kind of why I enjoy doing it. And there's no way I'm encouraging people to be that worldly. You have your priorities, you have things you must balance. People work. It's not their job to maximize things, right? You're not looking for the best thing. If you're looking for the best thing, the answer is everything. Telling a human being you need to know everything is a recipe for chronic depression. So the idea is you do just enough to keep everything you want in control. So no, you don't have to know what a little kid needs to behave like. If you're a high school teacher, you only need to know what a high school kid deals with, right? At least minimum that. But nowadays, things are so detached. Kids don't even want to know what their parents feel like, let alone the other way around. Like it's already disheartening that parents are so pressured by society with so many other things to juggle that they rarely have time to resonate with their kids. But the kids offer an equally strong barrier to not want to relate to their adults. And there's one really great tool that would encourage both without the barriers of its introduction. YouTube, the internet. It's such a powerful tool right now. It's in everyone's lives. Even my parents, who are like 60 plus, is so conditioned by the internet because they like watch all their news now. Now they can always watch news instead of having to wait for the TV to broadcast news. They just keep consuming news, and my mother always like freak out and paranoid and everything. She's so easily influenced by YouTube. But that could be used as a recipe for everything else. And some of my favorite vloggers seize that opportunity. Like they totally seize that opportunity where they made it so that it's an educational platform. Like they designed how to make psychology interesting because it basically is like watching a YouTube video, right? So that's kind of the power. I love educators who still do that. And I want to use the word education because it's gotten such a stigma over the years. Like, educating doesn't mean I'm trying to make you smarter. Educating is I'm trying to inspire you to use whatever your imagination is to evolve that. So what I'm saying today will not be the same in a year from now, because hopefully whatever I'm saying today is someone else is saying as well, and then that evolves with whatever the time has changed. So in another year's time, all these digressions are gonna probably contextually be different, but hopefully the human condition stuff stays fundamentally adapted to the new context. That's kind of... And how does this all connect? And I bet the way I'm going about this, I'm pretty sure whoever's gonna watch this video or listen to this will know where this topic started at first. Because the grand scheme of communication is to constantly tie back and make sure you remind the person where it all started. And where did our conversation started? It started with the MMO experience. And it's the B-roll on this video. It is Neverwinter Online. Where is the feeling of all this relevance, all this training, normalization, communication between people? The MMO experience. All this and it's not a coincidence how I framed this, because my journey in understanding people's communication and relationships started in my reflection in World of Warcraft. Like, I thought back, I was like, you know, if I had to make a compelling argument, I literally told myself that this when I was 22 years of age. Is it 22? It's either 22 or 23. I was writing my resume, and I had to know, what if I can turn World of Warcraft into a compelling argument? And then I went on the line to see if anyone else tried to do that. And that's where I got the whole trivia about charisma and leadership as a prominent argument in World of Warcraft, because I was in a leadership position when I was playing World of Warcraft. But not only that, I had to spin, what did it do with socialization and understanding like human communication in general and approaching strangers and whatnot, right? And problem solving. So all that came full circle. So now I'm only sharing with you what that moment when I was 22 or 23, it's like 22 going on to 23, because we had to start thinking about our postgraduate life. We're leaving college basically, right? And I was writing my resume, and also the paragraph, like the essays you have to write to get into like grad school or other programs. I was writing this for a post-baccalaureate program for the National Institute of Health, and I was trying to rationalize what my learning experience was and all that. And this 15 years later, this is what it turned into. So this huge digression that I've started 15 years ago when I was 22, and I didn't ever stop thinking about it. So every day when I'm reevaluating and thinking about ways to digress and talk about learning experience, that's what I really mean. Like, your learning experience don't ever go away if you choose not to let it go away, and it can continuously be reformed. And what I'm saying here today, and as articulate as I can be, in another year or two, it's probably going to come up again, and it's going to add more things to it. Maybe in a year or two, the status quo changes dramatically, or a zombie apocalypse happens, and now I have to reform my take on how to communicate, right? Like, how do you communicate with someone when you're in distress about a zombie apocalypse? Something like that. I'm a little better at improvisational analogies that may be a little humorous too. I think that's probably the longest work in progress. Back in the day, I couldn't make analogies that make it a little relevant and spin things back to its own self with like humor and whatnot, like just a little deflection or misdirection. So nowadays I throw in things like, yeah, you know, this feels like choking on an FC in Osu. That kind of thing was a lot of practice too. Like, back in the day, it was facts. Just, this is facts. I don't know what to tell you. This is facts. No hand waving, no like pausing, no enunciation, no inflections up and down. Heavily emphasizing things. I think all that just, they all started, they were terrible. Like, if I don't have any like video evidence, but if video recording was a random thing back then, ooh, I still remember when I gave my presentation in 11th grade, and it was about making poor decisions, and I brought a pack of cigarettes, an empty pack of cigarettes, into my school, and I was reflecting on that, and a glass bottle, a glass root beer bottle that was in a paper bag. It was supposed to be for visual aid. We needed like visual aid, and the motif of the book, was you know, talking about making mistakes, like and I was talking about drinking and smoking, right? But I got some really weird sus looks because, you know, drinking and smoking, like even cartons and stuff, you weren't supposed to bring to school. So in retrospect, that stuck with me. But that speech was so nerve-wracking. I wasn't even concerned. I didn't even contemplate about, oh yeah, I just brought an empty pack of cigarettes into school. But it was a meaningful conversation. But if I had to give that presentation again, oof, in the most humble way I can say, I would get that entire class to believe everything I say. Like it's night and day. My presentation skills from when I was 17 to now are in another universe. And I don't even prep for my presentations anymore. I don't at all. How did I prep for the 17 thing? I wrote it all out and I just kept reading it over and over again until I could understand my motivations in every single word. And that led to the foundation of just practicing it every day. So what I mean is, instead of just waiting for the day of the presentation, I'm always practicing presentations. Everything I say is a presentation. I treat it like one. When I have to say something, I have to ask myself, how do I explain it to another person? So I do it every single day. That literal, write out the thing that my teachers actually told me not to do in high school. I actually did it. And then what I did was I made that work for me. I wrote every single word of my presentation because back in the day, I was a bit of a smart boy, right? I memorized things. So what I did was I memorized like 3,000 word essays and I just read it off. I even wrote where I need to pause, where I need to like breathe, where I need to motion. It was basically a play. Like I wrote it all out and I just keep reading it over, keep asking myself why I did it here, why I did it here, should I move the pause here? But now I do that every day. I don't do that just once. Like I don't do that because I have to give a presentation. I'm always thinking about doing it as a presentation. How do I express why I like this game? How do I express why I am frustrated but understandably empathetic about the disgruntled community of Neverwinter? Like, it's every day. And it's rehearsed to the point where it no longer requires much effort. In my opinion, it doesn't require much effort. But I have to remind myself, it is incredibly difficult to start. I mean, I spent over close to 20 years doing this. And that's what made me better at presentations. Is what made me better at interviews. Because I don't treat them like interviews anymore. Every day I want to know how to explain something to someone.